The world was cruel to those born without magic. Aristocrats ruled for centuries, considering themselves gods. But the gods remained silent when true darkness descended from the heavens. The nobility's magic was worthless against the demonic horde. Cities burned, people died, and there was little hope left. But even in hell, there is one who refuses to die. Colin Hall, a former slave, whom nature deprived of magic, but rewarded with an unbending will. He became the strongest, and no one could match his blade. But even legends die. When the enemy proved too strong, fate extended a hand to him in the form of the Cursed Grimoire, a book that grants magic even to those without a drop of noble blood. Colin Hall took a step into a new life and woke up in the arena. Opposite him stood a huge butcher who wanted to kill him. But now the protagonist had magic, with which he could change his fate. Colin looks down to find himself armed only with a basic sword and shield, confirming he has returned to his former weak self. The butcher charges, and the danger of this memory becomes immediate. Colin steadies himself and understands exactly what kind of beginning he has been given. As the crowd roars for slaughter, he recalls that this fight was once the turning point that drove him into slavery and ruin. Watching over the spectacle is Viscount Slaith of the Rhine territory, the noble tied to Colin's downfall. Slaith's cruel smile makes clear that this man and his schemes lie at the heart of the life Colin now intends to rewrite. A masked executioner raises his hammer over the young slave and declares that the nobles mean to use him as their pawn. The boy stays unnervingly calm instead of breaking under the threat. The butcher slams his weapon down and openly frames the match as a spectacle meant to force the slave into service. The crowd answers with cruel excitement, reveling in the violence. More spectators join the uproar, treating the boy's suffering as entertainment. The arena fills with chants for the butcher, making clear where public support lies. Among the nobles, one man watches with satisfaction as the mob backs their chosen killer. From above, the lord overseeing the event observes the slave alone in the arena while the crowd keeps roaring for blood. He begins to recognize that something about the boy is not matching expectations. The butcher dismisses any concern, still convinced the slave is finished. That confidence falters when he suddenly senses something has changed. The boy has somehow returned to the magic tome he had lost, and he realizes the chance he needed has come back to him. As the tome's power fuses with his body, he understands that his magic is no longer separate from him. He immediately sees the implication and sharpens his resolve. Acting on that realization, he moves first. He launches a swift counterattack, drawing on the tome's power through his own body. He closes the distance in an instant, turning the butcher's taunt back on him. The butcher finally understands he is in real danger, but too late. The boy cuts him down with a single decisive slash. He lands cleanly beyond the fallen butcher, proving the kill was effortless. In that moment, he recommits himself to changing the future in which demons wipe out humanity. The crowd erupts in shock as the expected outcome is overturned. He concludes that to survive that future, he must master both his swordsmanship and the magic tome now merged with him. But he also knows that as a slave, that goal is impossible unless he changes his position first. So he decides he must rise out of this life by any means available. Above him stands Marquis Darius Hall, Lord of the Rhine territory, the noble presiding over the arena. The Marquis leans in with interest as the boy silently vows to act sooner and more effectively than he did in his previous life. That vow is personal. He intends to rewrite his fate far earlier this time. A memory surfaces of an old low-born man telling him that the commoners have secretly wagered their hopes on him. The old man explains that they believe he can defeat the butcher the nobles raised to keep them terrified. But the man also confesses he cannot openly support him because Lord Slaitha's orders forbid it. Through tears, he begs the boy to lose on purpose, because defiance would bring deadly retaliation on him. Elsewhere, Slaith is shown currying favor with the nobles by managing the spectacle from behind the scenes. Remembering that, the boy realizes Slaith is the one who turned the arena into a trap for political gain. His expression hardens as he understands the real enemy behind the match. He rejects the idea of waiting for another chance and decides to seize this opening now. In the stands, frustration breaks out as the nobles' script starts to collapse. One of them blurts out the obvious problem: the butcher was supposed to win. Another admits they had already invested heavily in that outcome, exposing how rigged the event was meant to be. Slaith tries to calm everyone by insisting the chaos is still under control and part of his design. The Marquis quietly asks his aide what to make of the boy's final strike. The aide judges it as a slash of unusual power and precision, far beyond what an ordinary arena slave should manage. The Marquis agrees, concluding the boy was exceptional even before this upset. Meanwhile, the boy remains alert in the arena, ready for the next threat rather than celebrating. Slaith decides to stir the crowd further, intending to loosen their restraint and weaponize the unrest. He reassures himself that everything is still unfolding according to his plan. Gloating, he predicts the crowd will soon see the boy ripped apart when he stages a second act. Instead, the crowd begins chanting the boy's name, turning him into the arena's new focus. That sudden shift leaves Slaith stunned as his control starts slipping away. The spectators surge into anger and confusion, accusing Slaith of cheating them and demanding an explanation as his scheme backfires. A noble watching the arena is thrown into alarm, unable to understand what the young fighter is planning. He abruptly orders every gladiator to be gathered at once, treating the situation as an emergency. As the order spreads through the stands, another observer notes that the spectacle is becoming far more interesting. Armed gladiators begin rushing into the arena with spears, moving to surround the lone slave. More fighters join in, clearly turning what should have been a match into a coordinated hunt. Even heavier gladiators arrive with oversized weapons, showing that the boy is being overwhelmed by force. In the middle of the encirclement, the slave recalls that in his past life he never managed to enter House Hall because he lacked the right connections. Now he believes he finally has the strength to force his way forward, but he still needs Marquis Darius to take notice of him. He realizes that merely defeating opponents will not achieve that goal, so he openly declares that he is going all out, making sure everyone in the arena hears his intent. The crowd mistakes his confidence for madness and eggs him on as a doomed slave putting on a show. Facing the ring of attackers, he calmly raises his sword and invites them to come. The gladiators charge together, convinced numbers and brute force will crush him. Instead, he slips through their first assault with impossible speed, breaking their formation in an instant. His sudden leap leaves the attackers stunned, as if he has vanished above them. He turns mid-motion without panic, already reading the next opening. Then he cuts one gladiator down in a single clean stroke, drawing first blood before the others can react. He stays composed, scanning for the next threat rather than celebrating the kill. Two spearmen rush him together, trying to pin him from both sides. He intercepts one attack with a precise kick, knocking the weapon offline. Using that opening, he bursts straight through the line of spears and turns the attackers' momentum against them. Several gladiators are cut down almost at once, and the arena floor starts filling with blood as his charge tears through them. A heavily armed fighter tries to end it with a crushing overhead blow from behind. The slave notices the ambush at the last possible moment, and remains unnervingly calm. He catches the descending weapon barehanded, stopping the strike through sheer timing and control. Before the attacker can recover, he drives his own blade through the man's guard and body. The strike continues downward with terrifying force, turning into a devastating finishing blow. Its impact sends bodies and debris flying upward, making the scale of his power impossible to ignore. The noble who ordered the attack is shaken for the first time, realizing this is no ordinary slave. A bloodied blade suddenly flashes past that noble's neck, missing by a hair and serving as a direct warning. The sword buries itself in the wall behind him, cracking the stone and proving the threat was deliberate. Frozen in place, he can only stare as the message sinks in. Back in the arena, the slave plants his foot and prepares to press the advantage. He retrieves control of his weapon and readies himself for whatever response comes next. A faint smile shows that this escalation is exactly what he wanted. Humiliated, the threatened noble vows to make him pay in full. Yet his anger is met with uneasy silence, because everyone has just seen how badly he misjudged the boy. A high-ranking silver-haired noble finally speaks, dismissing the outburst as the whining of someone whose pride has been hurt. Others protest that this has nothing to do with Marquis Darius, and insist the slave should simply be executed for daring to seek a noble title. The silver-haired man repeats those words with disbelief, exposing how casually they reduce a person's life to slave and death. He condemns the nobles for looking down on people and mistaking that cruelty for common sense. His rebuke leaves the surrounding nobles tense and speechless. The threatened noble slams his staff down and challenges him, asking whether he still clings to that misguided ideal. As he speaks, he gathers green magic in his hand, preparing to justify his position with power and doctrine. He invokes divine authority, claiming that magic came from God and that the world was born with a clear hierarchy. From that belief, he argues that nobles inherited God's blessing and therefore stand above everyone else by right. He presses the silver-haired man directly, implying that opposing this order is the same as defying God. Watching this, the slave can only sneer at how convenient that logic is. The silver-haired noble turns the challenge back on his opponent and demands to know what is truly wrong with rejecting such a claim. As the crowd erupts in accusations of blasphemy, the slave remains seated at the center of the chaos while the noble's conflict finally breaks into the open. A young swordsman openly challenges Viscount Slaith, declaring that if the noble claims to be favored by God, he should prove it himself. Slaith answers with contempt, arguing that if the challenger truly stood in God's place, he would not need others to fight for him. The crowd is stunned that a mere slave would dare challenge a lord to a duel, and they can only fear he is about to be killed. Among the onlookers, outrage and disbelief spread as the insult to noble authority sinks in. Even the presiding elder is left silent, unsure how to respond to the reckless escalation. Facing him in the arena, Slaith brands the young man a wretched slave and treats the duel as punishment rather than a contest. Slaith begins casting magic, furious that the slave ruined his plans and even dared to mock God. He unleashes a spell from above, intent on crushing the challenger immediately. The young man notices the strange magical display and realizes the magic tome is revealing information to him. The tome exposes Slaith's status, showing weak magic and swordsmanship with no resistance to magic at all. Confident in his advantage, Slaith sends a wind spell to tear the slave apart. The young swordsman stays calm as the attack closes in, already thinking through what the tome has shown him. The wind engulfs him as Slaith promises to personally send him to the afterlife. Observers identify the spell as Wind Edge, a slicing wind technique meant to shred its target. The nobles eagerly speculate over how many pieces the slave will be cut into, treating his death as entertainment. The storm of blades intensifies, filling the arena with violent currents. Slaith boasts that this is the difference between a noble and a slave, expecting the spectacle to prove his superiority. Inside the spell, the young man strips away his ruined shirt and studies the attack instead of panicking. The tome now reveals his own status, showing no magic but Grandmaster level swordsmanship and beginner magic resistance. Realizing he has resistance now, he concludes the beginner wind spell can no longer seriously affect him. He quietly marvels that the odd ability he gained with the tome is useful after all. Compared to his own level, the spell becomes something he can simply endure and move through. He bursts through the wind unharmed, proving the attack means nothing to him. Slaith is shaken into disbelief when the slave dismisses his magic so casually. The elder watching the duel is equally stunned, sensing the balance of power has suddenly shifted. The surrounding nobles freeze as the impossible outcome sinks in. Seizing the opening, the young swordsman launches himself forward with his blade ready. Slaith can only stare, unable to accept that the slave has broken through his spell. He hurriedly draws his sword, trying to defend himself at the last second. The young man crashes into him before he can recover, knocking him violently off balance. A witness realizes too late that Slaith is in real danger. The swordsman's blade stops at Slaith's throat, forcing out a pained gasp and ending the duel in an instant. With Slaith on the ground and his weapon thrown aside, the slave stands over him in complete control. At that moment, the tome warns that a new source of magic power has appeared. A purple magic circle erupts beneath him, catching even him by surprise as Slaith recoils nearby. Dark skeletal hands rise from the spell and begin seizing his legs. More of the black hands surge up and clamp onto his body, pinning him in place before he can escape. He struggles, but the restraining magic tightens around his throat and face, choking off his movement. A new authority arrives, explaining they came in response to a report. Armed holy guards surround him and formally accuse him of defying nobles and disrupting order. Invoking the name of God, they place him under arrest while the restraint spell holds him fast. He tries to speak through the grip on his mouth, realizing the situation has turned against him again. The commander of the Divine Guard steps forward as the force behind the arrest. The tome identifies the organization as the Magic Tower, a body created to uphold Bloodline supremacy and noble authority. It further reveals the Divine Guard as the tower's armed enforcers, stronger than ordinary nobles and loyal to that system. The young man understands he could break the restraint magic, but doing so would expose him to the powerful figures above this scene. Not wanting those higher powers to notice him yet, he hesitates and weighs his next move carefully. He decides there is no middle ground left, and prepares to stake everything on a single declaration. Forcing his voice out through the restraint, he begins to reveal who he is. He proclaims himself Colin Hall, son of Marquis Darius Hall, and demands that they release him at once. The guards identify the prisoner as the Marquis' son, immediately changing the weight of the situation. Someone recognizes the name as Colin Hall, tying the accused man to a noble house. The crowd erupts in confusion, shocked that the Marquis apparently has another son no one knew about. Amid the uproar, the half-dressed captive stands bound in sinister restraints, marked as someone the Divine Guard has already judged dangerous. Rather than panic, he coolly wonders how this confrontation will unfold. A nobleman moves to kill him, dismissing his claim of noble blood as a desperate lie to save himself. He raises his sword and decides one life is a small price to erase the problem. Before the blow can fall, an older voice urgently stops him. Marquis Darius arrives in person, stunning everyone present. The attacker tries to justify himself by saying he was only about to dispose of an insolent wretch. Darius cuts him off with force and makes clear that dragging the family name through the mud is unacceptable. The surrounding guards are left reeling as the balance of power shifts instantly. The would-be killer is baffled that the Marquis is intervening at all. Darius seizes Colin by the throat and reveals that handing him over to the trading company was meant as a chance to improve, not permission for further disgrace. Even while being choked, Colin remains unnervingly composed inside the dark aura around him. Darius condemns him for refusing to mend his ways and for laying hands on Viscount Slath. While grudgingly admitting that at least he has nerve, Colin silently decides that this gamble now belongs to him. His confidence hardens as he commits to turning the situation in his favor. Still holding him aloft, Darius addresses Viscount Slath directly. Slath immediately backs down and offers a formal apology, blaming the trouble on his foolish son. Colin protests that Slath's son was the one who insulted the Marquis first, trying to redirect the blame. Darius shuts him down at once and refuses to let him speak further. The Divine Guard captain promises Darius that he will personally discipline the Viscount's son. With the matter seemingly settled, Darius orders everyone else to leave. Slath suddenly objects and insists Colin must not be released. Driven by rage, his son draws a blade and openly declares he will kill Colin himself. Colin notices the outburst without losing his calm. The young noble doubles down, swearing he will finish Colin no matter the cost. He lunges, turning the tense standoff into an attempted attack. Colin answers with a faint, amused smile. He twists the attacker's own words, pointing out that permission to act against anyone should include the highest-ranking people present as well. He explicitly names Darius, Lord of the Rhine territory, as one of those included. He extends the logic to the Divine Guard acting under the god's authority, implying they too are targets under that reckless claim. He presses the point until its meaning becomes unavoidable. The implication lands as an accusation of rebellion against both Lord and divine authority. The attacker instantly falters, realizing he has walked into a trap he cannot talk his way out of. A guard moves decisively to intervene as the conclusion becomes official. The Divine Guard captain declares the matter misunderstood no longer and effectively accepts Colin's framing of the incident. He apologizes to Darius for his earlier behavior and prepares to withdraw with his men. Before leaving, he addresses Viscount Slath, making clear the consequences are not over. He states that a full report of the incident will be sent to the Magic Tower. Slath collapses into dread as he is told the final judgment will come later from higher authority. Colin exhales, the immediate danger finally passing. As the guards depart, they note that Colin himself will require a separate detailed report. One of them repeats the startling claim that he is the Marquis's son. The others struggle to understand how the Lord of the Rhine territory could have a hidden child no one knew about. Their commander rejects the idea outright, convinced that man cannot truly be the Marquis's son. But another guard points out that Colin stayed fully conscious under restraint magic, suggesting the Marquis may be protecting him for some special reason. Unable to determine the truth, the commander orders constant surveillance and demands reports on Colin's every move. The guards accept the order and leave with Colin now marked as a dangerous mystery under watch. A noble carriage races through the forest as its passengers leave a recent confrontation behind. Inside, the mood is light for at least one rider, who openly enjoys the spectacle that just unfolded. The older noble praises the young man's performance, treating what happened as proof of unusual promise. Colin sits in tense silence before the Marquis, unsure how to answer the attention now fixed on him. He begins by formally thanking Marquis Darius for intervening on his behalf earlier. Colin explains that Darius had his butler purchase his contract, freeing him from his former owner. Darius cuts past the gratitude and presses for the truth of Colin's background, convinced his skill did not come from nowhere. He judges Colin's movements to be those of a trained fighter and suspects he once learned under a master swordsman. After hesitating, Colin decides to reveal the life he has kept hidden. He recounts being born in a remote, impoverished village and, after losing his parents young, being sold to a slave trading company to pay the village's debts. He goes on to say that a certain noble bought him, taught him the foundations of magic and combat, and raised him with care. Remembering that man, Colin admits he had come to see him as a true father. He confesses that although he received much from him, he ultimately failed to repay that kindness. That failure now drives him, and he resolves to meet his benefactor's expectations no matter the cost. Darius is struck by the intensity of Colin's resolve rather than put off by it. He pieces together that Colin's desperate attack on Slath came from rudimentary magical training and a refusal to abandon his purpose. The realization sharpens Darius's interest, as he sees not just talent but exceptional will. He begins to imagine Colin standing above the many polished nobles around him. To Darius, this young man suddenly looks like someone who could make a long-held ambition possible. Before he can say more, the butler announces that they have reached their destination. The carriage rolls to a stop, ending the private exchange. They arrive at Darius's grand estate, a place that reflects the power Colin has just been drawn into. The scale of the mansion and grounds makes clear that Darius commands immense wealth and status. Darius steps out first and orders Colin to follow him inside. As Colin moves to obey, Darius makes one thing clear: Colin is no longer a slave. But he immediately tempers that freedom with a warning that a peaceful life is not what awaits him here. Colin answers with the harsh creed he already lives by, accepting that this world belongs to the strong. Darius approves and says that understanding is exactly why he chose to help him. He tells Colin that surviving what comes next will depend entirely on Colin's own ability. Colin listens without flinching, taking the warning as a challenge rather than a threat. Seeing that reaction, Darius admits he has high hopes for him. He leads Colin toward the mansion and signals that this is only the beginning of a larger test. As they enter the world of high nobility, the story frames House Hall as a family obsessed with preserving bloodline purity above all else. The estate itself stands as a symbol of that rigid aristocratic order. Darius is revealed to be an exception within it, having suffered prejudice because his own mother was a servant. Even so, through relentless effort and overwhelming ability, he rose to the rank of Marquis. He became known throughout the kingdom as the Lord of the Ring territory, a man whose authority no one ignores. With that history behind him, Darius tells Colin that birth means nothing to him. He adds that Colin's past matters just as little once he is under this roof. In this house, Darius says, only ability has value. He defines that value in absolute terms: strength can win wealth, status, and honor alike. Then he makes a sweeping promise to Colin, offering any reward he desires if he can prove worthy of it. The condition is simple and brutal: Colin must possess the power to claim what he wants. Darius orders him to remember that principle as the law of life in this place. Colin latches onto the promise and begins testing its limits in his mind. A bold possibility forms as he wonders what would happen if he aimed not for comfort or safety, but for Darius's own position. He voices the thought aloud, asking what if he set his sights on Darius's lordship itself. The butler is stunned, and even the air of the hall seems to jolt at Colin's audacity. Darius repeats the challenge back to him, weighing the meaning of such naked ambition. Instead of taking offense, he bursts into delighted laughter, thrilled that Colin's desire reaches as high as possible. The Marquis refuses to yield his authority, and dares anyone confident enough to seize it by force. A hidden observer reflects that Darius Hall has survived this long by obeying the brutal logic of the strong ruling the weak. He recognizes that Darius's claim of fairness is a lie masking the hatred nobles direct at him. That hostility gives way to a formal homecoming as a woman in red arrives to greet the Marquis. Darius is caught off guard by who has come to receive him. The visitors are revealed as Fried Hall, Darius's eldest son, and Katrina Williams, Darius's wife, both presenting themselves as a proper family welcome. As the household watches, Darius notes that rumors of his return spread quickly and realizes the reception has been carefully staged. He immediately understands that the information reached them through covert channels rather than chance. Katrina answers his suspicion with a pleased, knowing composure. Darius narrows his eyes, realizing this is not the reunion it pretends to be. Katrina confirms his judgment by revealing that she sent a spy in place of a sincere welcome. The hidden son identifies her as the schemer who once tried to destroy both him and Darius's ideals. He recalls that Katrina and Fried joined forces through status and ambition, plotting to secure Fried as heir. Remembering how he once walked into her trap, he resolves not to be outmaneuvered again. He steps forward with exaggerated humility, thanking them for a welcome he clearly does not accept at face value. Then he publicly names himself Colin Hall and declares that from this day he will serve the Hall household under that name. Fried is jolted by the claim, immediately sensing the threat in it. Katrina also reacts, but Fried moves first, unable to let the declaration pass. She frames the issue as insolence, outraged that a mere slave would dare use the Hall family name. At her command, a servant answers at once. Katrina coldly rebukes the butler for failing to teach the newcomer his place. The butler can only bow in tense silence under her accusation. Before anyone can enforce her will, Colin draws a sword. He counters that the Hall name was granted by the head of the house himself, making his claim legitimate. With his blade leveled at them, he demands to know whether they intend to challenge Darius's authority over his own household. He goes further, vowing that one day he will become lord and force them all to bow before him. Katrina falls silent, measuring the danger behind his audacity. Fried is equally stunned, his confidence shaken by the open challenge. Darius, by contrast, is quietly pleased to see the confrontation laid bare. The servants begin murmuring over Colin's use of the title lord. Many dismiss him as a delusional slave speaking above his station. Katrina cuts through the murmurs with a sharp reminder that she still controls the room. The household immediately stiffens and falls back into obedient silence. Colin answers that pressure with a calm, confident smile. Katrina responds with contempt rather than retreat. She declares that a lowly slave should never speak as if he belongs among nobles. Her words trigger the maids to arm themselves with pole weapons. The butlers follow, drawing blades to support her side. More attendants take up weapons, turning the reception into a coordinated threat. Even the maids join the formation, showing that the household staff are effectively Katrina's armed force. The butlers complete the draw, ready to strike on her behalf. In moments, Colin is surrounded by armed servants as Katrina's faction moves to crush his defiance. Darius suddenly orders everyone to stop before the clash can begin. Colin halts with his sword still in hand, waiting for Darius to decide the matter. Darius declares that Colin's account is true and warns that if Colin can prove himself, he will accept him as his son even if that means harming Fried. Fried erupts in panic and protests to his father. As Fried rushes forward in disbelief, Colin stands behind Darius while the Marquis openly backs him. Darius's expression hardens, showing he is fully committed to what he has just announced. Katrina treats the declaration with amused restraint, pretending she has no objection if that is truly Darius's will. But behind her smile, she signals that she is about to reveal her next move. The manor's hierarchy is introduced. Countless servants keep the estate running, but only a rare few are ever acknowledged as part of the Hall family. That exclusivity breeds resentment, especially among staff who see how many labor without ever being granted a name or status. Even among the servants, the divide between ordinary workers and those favored by the house is treated as a serious matter. The grievance sharpens into outrage that a newcomer has appeared and is already being allowed to call himself a Hall. A noblewoman presses Marquis Darius to accept that reality, making clear the family cannot simply ignore the claim. Instead of rejecting the boy outright, she proposes a test to determine whether he deserves recognition. Her idea is simple: let him prove his worth, and if he fails, strip him of the Hall name under the family's own rules. The young claimant immediately objects, seeing that a one-sided trial would solve nothing. One rival mocks his hesitation, assuming he is backing down now that his status is being challenged. He turns the proposal around by insisting the test should be open to everyone, with the family name going to whoever actually proves superior. He argues that ability should matter more than birth, pointedly suggesting it is better to make a capable heir than protect an incompetent one born into the role. That public challenge humiliates the current candidate, who feels his pride and legitimacy have been attacked. As he fumes, he realizes that if the newcomer truly competes, the inheritance struggle could become far more dangerous than expected. His mother cuts in before he can explode further, reasserting control over him. She reminds her son that losing composure in public only weakens his standing. With cold confidence, she tells him that nobles should remain graceful and not be provoked by someone she still considers beneath them. She also reassures him that he holds the decisive advantage, overwhelming magical power. The newcomer, unfazed by the family's scheming, decides to let events play out and watch the conflict unfold. The rival reluctantly calms himself, accepting his mother's advice for the moment. In the end, Darius accepts the proposal and announces that an open selection for the heir will be held in a month. Until then, the newcomer must remain in the manor as a low-ranking servant, much like in his previous life. He treats that arrangement as an opportunity, planning to use the time to study the manor's magic tome. As he walks with the butler Colin, he notices the older man already seems to know more about him than he should. Colin explains that Darius's upright reputation draws the attention of many nobles, making the succession issue politically sensitive. He then points out a contradiction in the newcomer's background. He once said a noble had picked him up before he came here. That does not match the slave trader's story that he was bought directly from a remote village. Colin reveals his suspicion that the boy's convenient appearance during Darius's succession crisis is too perfect to be coincidence. He frames the newcomer as an almost tailor-made answer to the Marquis' problem, which only makes him more suspicious. To force the issue, Colin suddenly draws a blade and presses the boy to admit whether he is a spy. The boy stays calm, addresses him respectfully, and admits the suspicion is understandable, but insists the situation is more complicated. He reminds Colin that the slave traders who handled him were hardened criminals who lied without hesitation. He explains that those men worked in teams and routinely deceived buyers, so their account of his origins was never trustworthy. He adds that they also lied about his combat ability, claiming he was only mediocre when his movements clearly showed far greater skill. He backs that up by outlining the Empire's strict ranking system for swordsmanship and magic. Most people plateau at middling levels, and few ever reach the high ranks in either discipline, making such talent hard to hide from a trained eye. In elite groups like the Royal Guard, high-level sword skill is the norm, which is why Colin recognized the discrepancy immediately. Colin realizes the traitors must have deliberately fed him false information. That leads him to the darker conclusion that someone may have wanted him to kill the boy under a false pretense. The boy seizes the opening and argues that a true spy would not try to place himself in the Lord's seat where everyone would scrutinize him. Colin asks him to explain that logic. He answers that spies seek proximity and secrets, not the most visible position in the house. So if he really were a spy, he says, he would target Colin's role instead. He bluntly points out that becoming the butler would be the ideal post for gathering information. From there he proposes a bargain. If Colin helps him get close to Darius, he can help Colin expose the other noble's spies. He offers to serve publicly as a servant, while secretly acting as bait and a counterspy, asking for Colin's cooperation in return. Colin warns that such a move would make enemies of the other nobles. The boy accepts that risk, arguing that the stakes are already high because if anything happens to Darius, the heir will almost certainly be one of those nobles' allies. Colin recognizes that the boy is willing to shoulder the danger of the succession struggle, and that his ambition is as sharp as his instincts. Even so, Colin remains wary, sensing that a proposal this favorable to him likely means the boy is still hiding another layer of intent. Without rejecting him, Colin chooses to move forward cautiously and leads the boy to his quarters, leaving their uneasy alliance to develop from there. The newcomer accepts the instructions without argument. His orientation begins at the estate where the servant hierarchy governs daily life. A senior servant leads him through the grounds and starts assigning his place. He is told the household is strictly divided, with elite attendants serving the lord and young master at the top. Below them are the ordinary workers who keep the residence running through domestic labor and heavy work. The guide explains that the lowest-ranked servants are confined to the annex and barred from approaching the main residence. Their lives are reduced to exhausting chores for almost no pay. The final rule is the most important one: all senior servants are absolute authorities. He is warned that disobedience is never tolerated. That warning immediately gains context when he notices a hostile group of servants waiting for him. They make it clear they have already decided to treat him as prey. The guide leaves him with the reminder that these house rules come from the lady of the estate. Satisfied, the guide walks away, expecting the lesson to continue without him. Left alone, the newcomer recognizes that blind obedience is exactly what these men intend to exploit. The group closes in and formally identifies him as Colin, the new servant. He answers politely, trying to avoid provoking them. Instead, his name only amuses them and sharpens their contempt. They reveal they know he is rumored to be the estate's future lord, making him an even bigger target. One thug accuses him of already clashing with the lady and the young master, framing him as someone who needs to be put in his place. They decide to teach him what submission is supposed to look like. To start the humiliation, one of them smashes a bottle into a weapon. They order him to kneel and beg if he wants to survive. A thug grabs him and presses the threat close, demanding total compliance. The moment they assume he has submitted, he seizes the opening instead. He violently breaks the man's grip and throws him aside in one clean motion. The others freeze, stunned that the supposed victim fought back. He follows with a hard kick that sends another attacker flying. That man crashes down, badly hurt before the fight has truly begun. Seeing they insist on force, the newcomer decides to stop holding back. He slams into the next thug with overwhelming speed while mockingly apologizing as he attacks. He keeps battering them in rapid succession, turning their attempted hazing into a rout. Humiliated and enraged, the remaining men abandon intimidation and turn murderous. One of them urges the others to kill him outright and raises a stool as a weapon. The newcomer stays calm, now fully in control of the encounter. He draws a sword, revealing that he was never defenseless. With a single thrust, he knocks another attacker backward before the man can close in. Even as one thug swings wildly, the chaos only injures his own side. The newcomer leaps through the confusion to press the advantage. He drives a brutal kick into the red-haired thug's face. The blow launches the man away and shatters the group's momentum completely. One survivor tries to steady himself, realizing too late how badly they misjudged him. The newcomer pins him with the blade at his throat and makes the power shift undeniable. He coldly asks whether they have had enough. Terrified and bleeding, the man immediately yields and admits defeat. Accepting the surrender, the newcomer lowers the pressure and turns away with casual confidence. But the beaten thug cannot let go of his hatred. He secretly snatches up the broken bottle for one last attack. Driven by spite, he lunges from behind intending to kill him. The newcomer senses it and responds with weary contempt. He ends the ambush in a single sweeping counter, cutting the attacker down before the strike can land. A young man brutally severs another person's hand, showing he is willing to use ruthless violence to get where he needs to go. While his victim collapses screaming behind him, he stays calm and focused, treating the attack as a necessary step rather than a crime of passion. He tells himself that after going this far, the people he is trying to satisfy had better accept what he has done. For the moment, he believes the act has earned Mr. Cornell's trust, though he knows that only draws him deeper into uncertain danger. With that in mind, he opens a magic tome, determined to gain real power instead of relying only on schemes. He resolves to learn magic so he can protect himself, and the book responds as if recognizing that need. As he studies, he recalls how Katrina's marriage to Marquis Darius let her purge Hall's old servants and tighten her control over the household, worsening the feud between the two bloodlines. In that struggle, Cornell became the Count's key enforcer, strong enough to keep even the Countess's inner circle in check. Cornell's influence was so overwhelming that, despite not being a blood heir, he was effectively treated as one because no one could oppose him. But the narrator remembers that in his previous life, Cornell eventually met a bloody and tragic end. That death gave Countess Katrina a sudden opening to seize the heir's position, convincing him that Cornell must not be allowed to fall again. He pushes aside the larger political stakes for now and returns to training, deciding that basic resistance magic is the first thing he needs. He narrows his goal to a shield that can serve as both defense and offense. As he channels mana into the tome, the spell formation surges violently into place. Instead of learning by trial and error, he realizes the book is pouring its contents directly into his mind. The transfer overwhelms him, but he understands that this shortcut is letting him absorb knowledge far beyond what his current level should allow. From the spell data, he identifies the form he needs, a defensive construct called Golden Wall. The magic's image sharpens into a towering armored guardian built around a massive shield. He invokes the spell's core commands and brings the guardian into existence above him. The strain is intense, and he realizes this is the price of forcing himself to learn too much too quickly. He remembers a noble girl once explaining that true magic training depends on keeping the flow of mana open rather than choking it off. Even while struggling, he bitterly notes the unfair advantage nobles have when magic comes to them as naturally as breathing. Instead of backing down, that frustration hardens into excitement and determination. He forces more mana through his hand and stabilizes the spell with sheer will. The summoned shield warrior fully manifests, proving he has succeeded in casting the resistance magic. Still, he braces himself to endure whatever backlash follows. Before the moment can settle, a loud disturbance outside breaks his concentration. The scene shifts to laborers at work, wringing out laundry as the day begins. One worker is suddenly called out by another, drawing attention toward the entrance. They recognize that the troublesome brat has shown up again. The young man strolls in acting casual and half asleep, making it clear he expected to be dragged into work sooner or later anyway. He privately notes that avoiding this confrontation would not have helped him in the long run. A status display confirms his gamble paid off. He has gained beginner-level resistance magic and a low mana aptitude. Satisfied that the experiment worked, he turns to face whatever comes next. When accused of overexerting himself in training, he brushes it off, already more interested in testing his new footing than in resting. Outside, the guard squad moves through the area, forcing everyone to clear the way. The workers immediately bow and greet them, showing how absolute the guard's authority is over common laborers. The guards single out the young man at once, making it clear they have not forgotten him. A nearby worker hurriedly lifts a bucket, trying to stay out of trouble as the guards approach. The bucket carrier freezes under the squad's presence, already sensing danger. One guard lashes out without warning, kicking the worker and sending the bucket flying simply because he was in the way. Water splashes across the ground as the bucket crashes down, turning the humiliation into a public spectacle. A guard steps into the spill and pauses, annoyed more than inconvenienced. Another guard mocks the situation and pretends to calm things down, using false civility to make the abuse feel even more deliberate. The worker immediately begs forgiveness and blames his own carelessness, showing he has learned that survival depends on accepting blame no matter what happened. The bald guard crouches beside him and acts understanding, but the performance only sharpens the threat. The worker thanks him through fear and humiliation, while the guard enjoys the submission. Then the guard's tone shifts, revealing that the kindness was only bait. He grabs the worker by the face and coldly condemns him for meeting a superior's gaze, treating even eye contact as insolence. To enforce that lesson, he savagely gouges out the worker's eye while warning him never to look at him again. In the aftermath of a brutal punishment, the onlookers treat the main victim with cold pity rather than sympathy. The accused young servant snaps at the crowd staring, refusing to cower under their judgment. A superior's command forces everyone else to kneel, instantly restoring the hierarchy around him. The black-haired low-rank servant barely notices the commotion at first, distracted by mundane thoughts about food and his own status. That indifference ends when someone urgently calls for the boss. The gang reports that this servant was muttering about repaying the man who cut off their comrade's hand and warns that he is dangerous. The eye-patch leader immediately recognizes that this is no ordinary complaint. He singles the servant out and drags him into the confrontation. The servant openly links himself to the mutilated victim and asks whether they want to lose a hand as well. One thug answers with mockery, insisting their side has rank and backing while belittling the servant. The leader frames the matter as simple retaliation and surrounds the servant with armed men. Instead of backing down, the servant accepts the logic of punishment and says he will offer them a choice too. He calmly asks which arm they are willing to sacrifice. The leader laughs off the threat, convinced someone so low-born could never challenge him. To make an example of the servant, he calls in a stronger subordinate to handle the fight. The servant is caught off guard when he realizes who has stepped forward. The challenger is introduced as Dak, a former champion of the arena who now serves as a mid-rank subordinate. The servant recognizes him at once as a partner from his past life, someone he never expected to meet here. A memory flashes of the two of them once fighting side by side with perfect trust. Seeing Dak now bruised and reduced to this role, the servant realizes he has been beaten down by this place. Dak, equally unsettled, asks whether the servant truly intends to fight here. The servant answers that this world runs on rank and obedience, and anyone who breaks that order is punished. Dak understands the implication. Even if he hates it, he is not allowed to refuse the command. The servant's faint smile shows he has already accepted that reality. Dak attacks first, moving with the speed expected of a former champion. But the servant reads him instantly instead of being overwhelmed. He traps the eye-patch leader at sword point and turns the rules back on their owner. While holding the leader hostage, he declares that he will enforce punishment himself. The surrounding guards are stunned that he crossed the distance before anyone noticed. Dak realizes the servant acted in a single instant. The servant reaches toward Dak and quietly calls him by name. The leader tries to reassert dominance by demanding respect for who he is. He boasts about divine favor and his connections, claiming that everyone in the servant hall owes him loyalty. His men tense up, ready to strike if ordered. Even the other servants watch in fearful silence, knowing how dangerous this defiance is. The servant remains cold and focused, unimpressed by the leader's threats. He tightens control and makes the leader feel how completely his life is in the servant's hands. The leader admits the servant understands the situation, but insists he still cannot let this insult pass. He signals his men to seize Dak before dealing with the servant, turning the former champion into leverage. The guards obey at once, closing in on Dak with their blades. They stab Dak from behind, using him as a disposable lesson in obedience. The servant is shaken for the first time, stunned that they would butcher Dak so casually. The leader explains that before punishing the servant, he intends to discipline the servant's underlings first. Dak collapses bleeding while the guards stand over him, proving the threat is real. To deepen the cruelty, one guard drives a sword through Dak's hand and pins him to the floor. Dak screams as the men mock him and promise worse if he causes trouble again. The guards treat the torture like routine discipline, confident no one can stop them. That confidence breaks when the servant launches himself forward in a sudden counterattack. Dak can only stare in shock as he realizes the servant is moving to save him. The servant cuts through the attackers in a single violent rush, finally turning the punishment back on those who imposed it. The vice captain catches his opponent off guard and revels in the opening. He moves in from behind, mocking the younger man for dropping his guard against an enemy. But the black-haired servant turns the ambush around in a single motion. The vice captain realizes too late that the exchange has gone wrong. His sword is cleanly broken, leaving him stunned. The black-haired man spares him, warning that next time he will not stop at the weapon. Humiliated, the vice captain freezes under the threat. Before the conflict can continue, the black-haired servant intercepts another strike aimed at the shirtless blonde guard. The blonde guard urgently begs him to stop, unwilling to let things escalate further. The clash breaks apart as both men are forced back. Even while being restrained, the blonde guard pleads for no more wrongdoing to be added to the vice captain's record. He grips his sword so hard that his wounded hand bleeds, showing how much strain he is under. The black-haired servant falls silent, weighing the plea. He agrees to let the matter go for the blonde guard's sake, but makes it clear there will be no second mercy. The surrounding guards are ordered to leave at once, and they retreat nervously. Once they are alone, The black-haired servant asks why someone stronger than the vice-captain refused to fight back. The blonde guard answers with bitterness that defying the vice-captain would ruin his life, and he sees no point explaining himself to a man marked for death. He reaches for his weapon, still tense and defensive. The black-haired servant casually takes the sword from him and says it has become a bad omen for its owner anyway. He stands alone with both blades, unbothered by the hostile attention around him. Meanwhile, the vice-captain vents his embarrassment by dunking the blonde guard in water and blaming him for making him look foolish. The guard is left choking and drenched by the punishment. He apologizes through gasps, but the vice-captain is still furious. The vice-captain kicks him away and orders him out of sight. When another guard asks whether they will really let the black-haired servant go, the vice-captain refuses. Instead, he decides on a crueler retaliation by spreading word that the black-haired servant has declared war on the first-class servants, hoping to isolate him completely. The blonde guard is left shaken by how far the vice-captain intends to go. Elsewhere, the black-haired servant keeps turning over the same question in his mind. Why did that man refuse to resist? That question lingers as the scene shifts. A lavish meal is prepared in the estate. Those at the feast begin with a formal prayer pledging their lives to God. Across the estate, nobles and high-ranking servants dine in comfort, while repeating blessings for God and the divine child. Among the servants, even dreams of promotion are interpreted as divine favor, and they encourage each other to work harder for it. The same prayer is repeated by common workers waiting for food, showing how deeply the hierarchy has been absorbed. They are told to be grateful for the chance to labor themselves to the bone so God might choose them. Food is distributed in strict order, one person at a time. The line suddenly stiffens when someone unexpected approaches. The black-haired servant walks straight toward the serving table, and everyone recognizes him at once. He notices the stares but is more interested in the food. Ignoring the tension, he reaches for a bowl. A server slaps his hand away and declares that anyone who does not work does not eat. The workers glare at him, expecting trouble. He only clicks his tongue and starts walking off, as if he has another idea. The others wonder what he is planning until they spot where he is headed. To everyone's horror, he marches toward the dining area reserved for first-class servants. He pushes through the seated diners without hesitation. The nobles and attendants demand that someone stop the insolent slave. He plants himself at their table, completely ignoring their outrage. Then he calmly starts eating their bread. A stern official named Cornell addresses him and reminds him that this is the first-class servants' dining area. Others call for Cornell to punish him immediately. Cornell studies him instead of reacting in anger. Rather than punish him, Cornell treats it as a newcomer's mistake and tells him to come along. The onlookers are left baffled when the matter ends that easily. As they walk, Cornell reminds him of the estate's absolute rule of obedience to superiors. The black-haired servant openly rejects that principle. He argues that if the Lord promised rewards to those strong enough to earn them, then he has every right to claim a decent meal by his own ability. Cornell accepts him anyway and says he will now assist with the black-haired servant's daily life. But the arrangement comes with a condition. He must uncover the spies hidden within the house. Before they can discuss more, a hunting signal sounds and both men look up in surprise. Cornell explains that an unusual incident has occurred in Dusk Deep Forest near the hunting grounds, and the Lord intends to investigate it while hunting. The black-haired servant immediately takes interest. The mention of Dusk Deep Forest clearly sparks a plan in his mind. In the forest, the source of the disturbance is revealed to be a red-eyed black deer. The beast prowls like a monster rather than normal prey. It is identified as a red-eyed black deer. Arrows rain toward it from hunters lying in wait. The deer is struck repeatedly and collapses under the barrage. Hidden nearby, the black-haired servant watches with satisfaction. He steps out with bow and sword, ready to claim the aftermath. He cuts into the carcass to search inside it. His eye lights up when he finds what he expected. He extracts a monster core and recalls that such cores can be used for potions and crafted items. He judges this one to be a low-grade core, but still useful. Even a bottom-rank core, he notes, is enough to make mana recovery potions. A memory surfaces of Cornell explaining that only guards, royal knights, or those with permission may enter the hunting grounds after the forest incident. The black-haired servant had immediately twisted that rule into a loophole by asking whether entering with the guard squad would count. Back in the present, someone catches him in the act beside the carcass. It is the blonde guard, who scolds him for wandering off and reminds him that only nobles and mid-rank servants or above are allowed to hunt. The black-haired servant barely reacts to the reprimand. Instead, he snatches the guard's sword as casually as if borrowing a tool. The blonde guard is left staring in confusion as his weapon is taken. He still cannot process how easily it happened. The black-haired servant drives the borrowed blade into the deer again to make the kill look like the guard's. He cheerfully declares that the prey now counts as the blonde guard's catch. The guard rejects that absurd logic outright. He complains that being paired with a low-rank servant like this makes no sense. As he keeps working over the carcass, he wonders what Cornell was thinking by assigning them together. The black-haired servant produces Cornell's dagger as proof that he is acting under orders. He explains that their mission is to assist the Lord's investigation in the hunting grounds and gather food while they are at it. The blonde guard can only grumble at his terrible luck and watch him pocket the core. Still, he forces himself to focus on the mission. The guard begins butchering the deer properly, praying for God's protection as he works. He tells himself that if he performs well here, he might finally be promoted to a full guard. Then he notices the black-haired servant doing something else entirely. Instead of helping, the black-haired servant has already started a fire and is roasting the meat. When challenged, he answers as if this is the most natural thing in the world. The blonde guard protests that the meat is meant for the Lord and the others, not for one servant to eat alone. The black-haired servant shrugs that there is plenty, so taking a little should not matter. He even offers a roasted haunch to the starving guard. The guard tries to refuse out of loyalty to the vice captain and the guard squad. The black-haired servant cuts through that loyalty by reminding him that he only gets fed once every 3 days. He adds that losing his weapon will likely earn him punishment, and even more hunger once they return. Then he presses the point harder, asking how the guard can protect the Lord on an empty stomach. He promises he will keep quiet if the guard accepts. The guard's resistance finally starts to crack. As the blonde guard gives in and eats, the black-haired servant realizes he had been holding himself back far more than he admitted. He returns to the earlier question and asks again why someone that strong lets the vice captain bully him. The guard answers with despair, asking what good strength is in a world like this. He explains that nobles inherited divine power because their ancestors were chosen by God. He clings to the hope that if he keeps enduring and rising in rank, his little sister back home can finally be proud of him. To him, throwing away that fragile future would be unbearable. So he insists that servants are already fortunate just to survive, and that the only answer is to stop questioning and work as hard as possible. The black-haired servant hears the phrase divine power and latches onto it. He dismisses that power as nothing more than the ability to use a little magic. The guard snaps back that if he talks so boldly, he should learn magic himself. The black-haired servant calmly replies that he could teach the guard magic instead. That claim leaves the blonde guard stunned. He can barely believe what he just heard. Their conversation is cut off by a sudden alarm from deeper in the forest. The guard immediately realizes something serious has happened. A blue-flamed wolf tears into a man, confirming that the hunting party is under attack. The guard captain rallies his men to hold the line against a pack of flaming wolves. Even he is shaken by how bad the situation has become. The wolves break through and maul multiple guards at once. The captain grimly admits that even he is struggling against only a handful of these beasts. He manages to cut one down, but the pack keeps pressing in. Another guard calls out to him in panic. The captain turns and finds himself surrounded from every side. For the first time, he looks genuinely cornered. He fights back desperately, cutting and blocking as the wolves close in. At that moment, someone rushes toward the battle. The blonde guard and the black-haired servant arrive together, the former announcing their help while the latter is already thinking about the beasts as profit. To the black-haired servant, the wolves are valuable prey whose bodies and cores could change his fortunes. He fixes on the cores above all else as the real prize. Without hesitation, he leaps in and vows not to let a single beast escape. The wolves immediately redirect toward him. He launches himself straight into the center of the pack instead of retreating. The captain is stunned that anyone would charge into the middle of them. The black-haired servant mocks the beasts as weaklings that can only hunt in a pack. Then he unleashes a rapid volley at point-blank range and cuts through several wolves in one burst. He lands smoothly after the attack, completely in control. His focus sharpens as another wolf lunges. He notes coldly that even after watching their packmates die, the beasts still rush him without understanding the difference in strength. To him, their failure to grasp that gap is almost pathetic. He sidesteps a pounce and crushes the attacker with a brutal kick. The blow sends the wolf flying back toward the other guards. An arrow finishes the airborne beast before it can recover. The black-haired servant concludes that, for all their ferocity, they are still only beasts. More blue-flamed wolves circle in, but he faces them without the slightest sign of fear. A black-haired young man cuts through a pack of blue-flamed wolves so effortlessly that the beasts are torn apart before they can touch him. An older observer is shaken by the sight, realizing the monsters that normally overwhelm trained fighters are being handled as if they are no threat at all. The young man stays calm and focused, reading the battlefield without panic. When a pillar of blue flame erupts beside him, he slips away before it can catch him. A wolf lunges from behind to exploit the opening, but he notices the ambush in time. The attacker bears down with killing intent, convinced it has him cornered. Instead, he uses the falling blasts around him as footholds and turns the chaos into an advantage. He drops straight onto the wolf and crushes it underfoot, ending the surprise attack instantly. Without losing momentum, he twists his body to continue the assault. He drives another brutal strike into a second wolf, keeping the pack from regrouping. One surviving beast is forced down and left reeling as he lands nearby in control of the fight. He senses danger a moment too late and turns his head toward a new threat. A hidden shot catches him, and an arrow sinks into him while he is finishing the monster. A silver-haired youth in armor appears and warns him that skill means nothing if he drops his guard. The black-haired fighter accepts the criticism lightly and even praises the shot. The silver-haired youth admits, a little awkwardly, that the display was impressive. Their exchange is interrupted when a stern knight arrives with authority and demands to know who they serve. The pair explain that the armored boy is only a substitute guard and the black-haired one is a low-ranking servant, and that they came to support the Marquis' troops. The surrounding soldiers are baffled that such insignificant people were the ones who stepped in. Some of the guards resent being rescued by nobodies and mock the Marquis's household, especially its lady. The insult catches the silver-haired youth off guard, as if he has not fully grasped the jab. Ignoring them, the black-haired servant examines a glowing core from a slain wolf and judges it good enough for his purposes. He decides he now has the ingredient he needs and plans to follow a magic tome to brew a potion. The taunting from the guards finally draws his attention. A soldier angrily challenges his right to touch the monsters at all, treating him like a meddling brat. Others try to move on, saying the Marquis's mission matters more than arguing with him. Still holding the core, the servant coolly throws their own contempt back at them by calling their superior a lifeless old hag. That answer stuns the loudest guard into speechless disbelief. The insult nearly starts a fight, and the furious guard has to be restrained by his companions. The servant identifies the man as Marvin, making it clear he already knows more than he should. His thoughts jump to another time, when he had seen these people in a noble hall before disaster struck. He remembers Marvin, Glenn, and even Cornell standing among the Marquis's most trusted royal knights. In his previous life, those three died investigating the Whispering Forest, and their loss helped bring the Marquis family to ruin. Realizing fate has given him a chance to intervene, he understands he may be able to keep them alive this time. The silver-haired youth hurriedly apologizes for his companion's behavior, trying to smooth things over by claiming he simply does not know the rules yet. But the purple-haired knight answers with more contempt, dismissing the servant as the old lady's dog. The silver-haired youth is left genuinely confused by the insult rather than offended. The servant turns the mockery around, pointing out that if their lady later rises to power, the one serving her now will stand above them. The older knight concedes the servant's strength, acknowledging that much at least. Even so, he warns that raw ability alone will not make others accept him. The servant offers no argument, choosing silence instead. The knight ends the dispute by thanking them for the rescue and insisting they leave because the soldiers have a mission to complete. Before the group can separate, the ground begins to tremble under a heavy approach. The knights immediately tense and look around, realizing something far worse is coming. The forest erupts with pounding movement, and the rush of many bodies closing in at once. A new wave of blue-flamed wolves bursts from the trees, far larger than the first pack. The soldiers freeze as they recognize the scale of the threat. At their head appears an enormous alpha, and the purple-haired knight identifies it as an adult king-class beast. The giant wolf leads the pack straight at the formation, turning the skirmish into a desperate battle for survival. The king beast bares its fangs and closes in, radiating overwhelming hostility. A pack of blue-flamed wolves closes in on a squad of imperial swordsmen, with a far larger wolf pressing the attack from the front. The soldiers brace themselves and lock blades in panic as the beast's pressure bears down on them. A purple-haired woman realizes how dangerous the situation has become and starts to lose confidence. One of the men grits through the fear, trying to hold the line despite the overwhelming threat. Their older leader hardens himself and refuses to break even as the pack corners them. The giant wolf lunges straight through their defense, forcing the group to the brink. Someone clicks his tongue, recognizing that the situation is slipping out of control. A shield-bearing captain is startled when an unexpected figure suddenly appears in the middle of the crisis. The newcomer intercepts the giant wolf's strike and apologetically cuts in before the soldiers can even process who he is. With easy confidence, he reminds them that this is not the first time he has stepped in to save them. The Wolf King answers with a furious roar, refusing to be checked. The newcomer draws his sword art and prepares a precise counterattack. His strike lands cleanly across the Wolf King, forcing the beast back for the first time. The wounded king recoils, stunned that someone could actually hurt it. The swordsman steadies himself and admits this opponent is far tougher than the lesser wolves. The Wolf King retaliates by unleashing a massive wave of blue flame toward him. He meets the blast head-on, crossing his blades to keep from being crushed. Even as the force drives him back, he manages to split and throw off the attack instead of falling. He quickly judges that, in his current condition, defeating the Wolf King alone will be difficult. Accepting that limit, he snaps the damaged sword free and prepares to turn the soldiers into part of his plan. He calls the Imperial troops into formation, and they recognize him as the Azure King, the man who once helped save the country. The Wolf King pauses and studies him, sensing that the battle has changed. The pack regroups around its king while the soldiers gather behind the Azure King for direction. The soldiers worry that they could barely handle the underlings, let alone the king leading them. He dismisses the lesser wolves as secondary and tells them the real problem is the one commanding them. He explains that the Azure Flames obey only the king's will, so if the king falls, the rest of the pack will collapse with it. The older leader is shaken by the idea of directly challenging the king at all. A younger soldier objects that even the Empire's elite could not beat such a monster, especially with their swords already failing. The Azure King pushes back, insisting they cannot know their limit until they actually try. That reckless resolve leaves at least one of them convinced he is out of his mind. Even so, the group admits that if they want to survive, betting everything on the king may be their only real chance. Before panic can spread further, he stops them from rushing in and takes control of the timing himself. He assures them that the opening they need will come to them soon enough. Across the field, the Wolf King lifts its head and begins rallying the pack for a coordinated charge. With a commanding howl, it sends the blue-flamed wolves surging forward as one. The soldiers tense in alarm as the pack barrels toward them and instinctively prepare to meet the charge. He orders everyone to stay calm and hold their ground instead of breaking formation. Watching the approach with cold focus, he tells them to let the wolves come even closer. Some of the soldiers hesitate, wondering whether they should really trust such a dangerous plan, but they have no better option. One of them turns to Captain Glenn, looking for reassurance before committing. The Azure King singles out Dak to stand with him, drawing the young man directly into the heart of the plan. He reminds Dak of the sister he wants to make proud, using that personal bond to force courage out of him. Thinking of Erica, Dak steadies himself and finds the resolve to answer that call. As the wolves finally reach striking distance, the older leader warns that the moment has arrived. The Imperial soldiers brace behind their shields and swords as the pack closes in for the kill. But the Azure King stops them from acting too early and keeps everyone locked to his timing. He repeats the order to wait, letting the charging wolves commit fully before springing the trap. Even the lead wolf rushes in, unaware it is entering the exact range he wanted. At the last possible instant, he gives the signal to move. He immediately orders Captain Glenn to use Holy Guard to blind the wolves and strip away their sight. As the blue wolves close in, the older swordsman braces behind a glowing shield and holds the line. Seeing they are being overwhelmed, the black-haired fighter orders Marvin to unleash Heavenshaker Slash and clear the pack. Marvin answers immediately, raising his great sword and committing to the technique. His strike detonates through the battlefield and blasts several wolves away at once. At the same time, the purple-haired woman moves in with Phantom Blade, using afterimages to carve through the beasts while the black-haired fighter directs her to cover the rear. Her slashes thread through the pack and cut down multiple wolves in a rapid sweep. The group realizes the black-haired fighter not only knows Sarah and Marvin's signature arts, but also understands the theory behind them in unusual depth. That realization leaves the others staring at him, trying to place who he really is. While the veterans fight, Dak pulls the young knight along and rushes to join the action. Sarah keeps cutting through wolves and mockingly warns Dak not to slow her down. The young knight is baffled that Dak has stayed so calm and secretive this whole time. Dak darts through the battlefield, slipping between wolves as if he has a plan of his own. The knight demands to know what Dak is plotting, noting that Dak has no sword and should be useless in a fight like this. Dak dismisses that assumption and argues that people are not defined so simply. The knight presses him, unable to understand what Dak is trying to prove. Dak points to the giant wolf and insists that winning a fight takes more than swordsmanship, especially when facing a monster like that. As the knight starts to grasp his meaning, one possibility finally occurs to him. Dak might be using magic. Dak confirms it by unlocking the mana within his body and beginning a spell. A grimoire opens before him as he invokes Ice Lotus and gathers power around the charging wolf. With magic circles flaring around his hands, Dak targets the beast while the others watch in shock. A rain of ice lances crashes down and tears into the wolf's body. The young knight can only stare as Dak proves he is a real mage. Though wounded, the giant wolf remains standing and glares back with murderous intent. The black-haired fighter taunts the beast, testing whether it still has the will to keep coming. The wolf answers with a furious snarl instead of retreating. Dak and the knight reposition together, preparing to finish what the spell started. The knight charges straight at the monster, using Dak's opening to get inside its reach. He drives his blade down into the wolf's head, and Dak calls out in support as the attack lands. Dak gathers another surge of mana and declares that this will end the fight. He summons a towering spectral warrior above him, channeling the spell through a massive magical blade. The giant wolf rears up as the conjured weapon descends toward it. At the last instant, the beast's eye sharpens with sudden awareness, as if it senses the fatal blow. It tries to twist away, but the strike is already upon it. The magical blade cleaves straight through the wolf in a single vertical slash. The giant beast crashes down among the remaining pack, its death shaking the battlefield and breaking the wolves' momentum. As its body collapses, the surviving wolves are left leaderless, and the immediate threat ends. The young knight can barely believe what he just witnessed. Dak stands amid drifting ice and fading mana, making it impossible for anyone to deny his power any longer. When the others catch up, they are stunned to find the battle already over and demand to know what happened. Dak casually explains that their plan succeeded thanks to the knight drawing the alpha's attention, though the others are still trying to understand how he managed the decisive blow. Among the shattered ice, someone notices a fragment that seems important. Sarah picks it up and suspects the crystal may explain the strange nature of the monster they just killed. One of the older men laughs, saying the scene reminds him of when a certain lord was younger. That comparison confuses the young knight, who asks what he means by calling someone the big guy. Sarah elaborates that Dak's attitude and talent resemble Lord Darius in his youth, especially his habit of acting first and explaining later. The young knight realizes Dak has been keeping everyone in the dark while talking as if he knows far more than he should. Fed up, he explodes at Sarah for calling him a child and old hag, letting his frustration spill out. He loudly introduces himself as Dak, trying to force Sarah to take him seriously. His challenge catches Sarah off guard for a moment. An amused companion explains that, for some reason, Sarah always refers to the lady of the house as the old hag, leaving Dak baffled by the insult. The young captive blurts out in panic that the woman beside him was just called an old hag, instantly worsening his situation. The purple-haired woman snaps at him, furious that he would call her old at all. She aggressively insists she is still youthful and attractive, turning the moment into a personal grievance instead of a proper interrogation. While the guards restrain the boy, the commotion draws the attention of a black-haired man nearby. He stays silent, watching the scene with unreadable calm. The guards keep the captive pinned as the group's discipline continues to unravel into farce. Before things can go further, someone approaches from the road and shifts everyone's focus. A red-haired noble arrives on horseback and demands an explanation for the disturbance. The guards immediately recognize him as young Master Fred and tense up under his authority. The captive realizes who has appeared and grows uneasy. He quickly understands that this arrival makes the situation far more dangerous for him. The guards kneel and report that they heard a disturbance from the camp, treating Fred with formal deference. Fred studies the scene, already suspicious. A guard explains they were heading deeper into the forest to investigate when Azure suddenly attacked them. Fred is told that without the intervention of the two men present, the guards would have been eaten by a monster. Instead of joining the report, the black-haired man is found kneeling by a slain beast, focused on something else entirely. He drives a blade into the monster's body, apparently searching for or extracting something important. Fred asks to take the two rescuers back to camp so he can present their achievements to the Lord, but the older guard questions what he really means by that. The black-haired man immediately sees through Fred's motive and realizes Fred wants to use this incident to improve his standing in the succession struggle. He connects it to Fred's fear that if his father learns the truth, Fred's position as a potential heir could suffer. Fred's expression hardens when he senses his intentions have been read. The realization unsettles him because someone beneath him has seen straight through his scheme. The captive also catches on and recognizes exactly what Fred is trying to do. Fred turns his attention to the kneeling youth and identifies him as Dak, noting that he disappeared for a while only to turn up among these people. He mocks Dak as a low-ranking servant who should never have made it this far into the grounds, let alone slipped into the forest. Fred openly dismisses him as worthless, expecting submission. He twists the knife further by invoking Dak's younger sister Erica and implying Dak has forgotten the lesson of their family's past suffering. That threat confirms for Dak that Fred is using his sister to keep him obedient, but Dak refuses to be cowed. The black-haired man addresses Fred as reject, signaling that he knows him from before and does not respect his status. The insult shocks the others, and the purple-haired woman blurts out Fred's name in alarm. Fred is thrown off balance by being called that to his face. The black-haired man calmly explains that the guards kneel to Fred not because he is impressive, but because of his birth. The people around Fred stiffen as the insult lands in front of witnesses. He drives the point home by saying Fred's influence comes from having a countess for a mother, not from any merit of his own. With mocking ease, he ridicules Fred as someone who coasts through life on his parents' importance. Fred warns that he could kill him instantly, but the black-haired man agrees without fear, making clear the threat means nothing to him. He pushes the humiliation further by saying Fred would need his mother's approval before daring to kill him. He even imagines Fred begging that same mother for permission, reducing him to a pampered child in front of everyone. Fred finally loses control, his anger turning murderous. He orders his men to seize the black-haired man at once. Chains erupt around the target, revealing that the arrest is being carried out with magic or a prepared restraint. The black-haired man notices the attack and braces himself. The chains tighten around his body and pin his movement. At the same moment, hooded killers with glowing red eyes materialize around him, turning the arrest into an assassination attempt. One of the assassins moves a blade to his throat while he remains trapped in the chains. The older guard recognizes the attackers with horror as the blades of the Empire. Their reputation is explained. The Williams family's feared specialists in assassination and infiltration, infamous for overwhelming brutality. The assassin's presence points to backing from a powerful noblewoman, making the attack feel premeditated rather than impulsive. The older guard is appalled that Fred would use such killers under the excuse of guarding his son, and he tries to stop the young master from going too far. Fred covers the move by claiming the assassins are here under the Count's orders to assist with the investigation, attempting to legitimize the trap. The red-haired noble takes the boy's resistance as a direct challenge to his authority. The captive hurriedly denies opposing him and tries to soften the confrontation. He instead appeals to Captain Glenn, signaling that he has another target for his plea. With guards holding him at blade point, he urges Glenn to abandon the investigation and report nothing to their lord. Glenn realizes the prisoner is offering them a way to escape this trap alive. His companion agrees they cannot afford to side against either the noble or young Master Fried and should withdraw quietly. Though resentful, Glenn accepts that backing down is the safer choice. The two men bow out and excuse themselves, leaving the red-haired noble to handle the matter. Freed from interference, the captive coldly tells the noble to test his courage himself, warning that touching Fried will cost him his life. He goes further and dares the noble to kill him quickly if that is truly his intent. The noble answers that provocation with amused interest rather than anger. A sudden idea delights him, and he seizes on a crueler way to punish the boy. Dak is called forward before he understands why he is being singled out. The noble declares that actions have consequences and decides Dak will be the one to pay for what happened. He throws a sword at Dak's feet and orders him to make amends by taking it up. Then he reveals the true demand: Dak must kill the chained slave. Dak is stunned by the order and momentarily cannot process it. The noble promises to overlook everything that happened today if Dak obeys. Dak is thrown back to the demon invasion a month earlier, when the village first fell into chaos. In that memory, he struck the captive from behind in a desperate attempt to save someone. But the effort only left the captive on the ground before towering demons. Even then, the captive forced himself up and reached for his sword instead of giving in. A demon lord watched from his throne, treating the scene as entertainment. He mocked the captive's weakness and measured his worth by how much suffering he could endure. Dak stood nearby under guard, forced to watch while the captive struggled to rise again. Seeing it now, Dak is overwhelmed by guilt and horror. The demon's taunting challenge still hangs over the memory, demanding to know what the captive will do. The answer had been simple. He gripped his sword and chose to stand. He faced Dak and the demon holding him, placing himself between them despite his injuries. Even wounded, he planted his blade and braced himself to fight. Dak remembers the look of absolute resolve on the man's face. What followed was not anger but a confession. The captive told Dak that their father had died on Erica's birthday. He continued that their mother later died as well, leaving the siblings enslaved until Lord Darius took them in. He explained that Erica had been sent back to the Williams estate by the lady's orders and should still be safe from the demons. With tears in his eyes, he entrusted Dak with one last duty: protect Erica in his place. He even added a brother's small concern, asking Dak not to indulge her too much despite her picky eating. And he asked Dak to tell her that her brother died proudly, as a knight who fulfilled his duty. Dak's memory ends with the captive apologizing to him, making the burden even harder to bear. Back in the present, Dak stands facing the same man while the guards still hold the prisoner captive. The chains and blades around the prisoner make clear that he cannot defend himself. Dak tightens his grip on the sword, torn between the order he was given and the debt he owes. The red-haired noble calls out to him, pressing him to act. Dak raises the sword but hesitates, unable to strike. He finally protests that he cannot kill the man who once saved all of them from death. The noble immediately senses Dak's weakness and decides to exploit it. Smiling, he asks how Erica would feel if she learned her beloved brother died at the hands of a stranger she never even knew. Dak recoils and insists he could never do something like that. The noble twists the knife further, saying Erica would be just as devastated if she learned Dak had stood by and let her brother die. He adds that Erica had been starving herself to save money for Dak and had recently collapsed from exhaustion. That revelation shatters Dak's composure and leaves him frozen in shock. The red-haired noble dismisses the girl's fate, arguing that if she is going to be abandoned anyway, there is no reason to keep protecting her. A young knight rushes forward in panic, desperate to stop what is about to happen. Dropping to his knees, he begs the young master to spare his sister. The rider starts to leave, as if considering the plea only on his own terms. With a cruel smile, he casually orders the black-haired captive to be killed. Instead of breaking, the captive laughs at the threat and treats death as something beneath fear. Though chained and held by two masked enforcers, he stands firm and keeps mocking them. The red-haired man is thrown off by that reaction and demands to know what is amusing. The captive answers with contempt, saying even a stray dog knows how to bark before trying to kill. Hearing that insult, the kneeling knight realizes this prisoner truly believes a coward like the noble cannot kill him. The captive raises the stakes and proposes a duel to the death, claiming that would be far more entertaining than listening to empty threats. The noble hesitates, unable to read whether this confidence is madness or calculation. A blade at the captive's throat reveals the danger is real, yet he still does not flinch. The noble convinces himself that the prisoner is only bluffing and is secretly terrified of the Empire's assassins. Taking the bait, he accepts the duel and has the captive released to fight. The chains fall away, turning the execution into a formal contest. The black-haired swordsman faces the young knight Colin while the masked killers withdraw to the edges and watch. Colin steels himself and raises his sword, preparing to defend his sister through this fight. His sister is stunned that Colin is risking himself so recklessly. From horseback, the noble warns Colin not to disgrace himself now that the duel has begun. The black-haired swordsman attacks first, taunting Colin that defeat will leave his little sister in tears. He crashes in with overwhelming speed, forcing Colin onto the defensive immediately. Colin barely catches the blow, and realizes he is facing someone far faster than expected. The attacker follows through in one fluid motion and knocks Colin off balance. As he recovers, Colin understands that brute effort alone will not save him. Another strike comes down before Colin can reset, keeping him under relentless pressure. The black-haired swordsman chains his attacks together, and drives Colin back with precise swordplay. Locking blades at close range, he corners Colin and leaves him wondering why this man is fighting so fiercely. The answer comes quietly. He apologizes to Dak and admits he does not want to die either. That confession jolts Colin, who suddenly senses a deeper resolve behind his opponent's aggression. Colin lashes out in return, trying to break the momentum and seize control of the duel. The black-haired swordsman slips away from the counter and resets the distance without losing composure. He coolly declares that Colin has only 3 strikes left before the fight is decided. He doubles down on the provocation, promising to finish Colin within those 3 exchanges. Colin realizes he is dealing with someone dangerously confident and far more capable than he first appeared. Refusing to be dictated to, Colin vows he will not need 3 strikes and will end it in 3 seconds instead. His focus sharpens as he commits everything to a decisive response. The black-haired swordsman welcomes that resolve with a knowing smile, as if this is exactly what he wanted. Watching from behind, the noble remains smug, expecting the duel to end in his favor. Both fighters explode forward at once, turning the standoff into a race of footwork and timing. Neither yields ground as they close the gap at full speed. They cross in a blur of steel, each trying to land the decisive cut first. In the clash, the black-haired swordsman reveals the core of his resolve. Unlike the noble, he will not abandon his comrades. That conviction gives his attack a force that overwhelms mere technique and shakes Colin at close range. Hearing those words, Colin is reminded of the sister and companions he is trying to protect. He falters for an instant, caught between the enemy before him and the truth in that declaration. The two fighters shift positions in a sudden coordinated movement rather than continuing to oppose each other directly. The masked enforcers are startled, realizing too late that the duel has changed into something else. Back to back, Colin and the black-haired swordsman turn as allies in the same instant. Together they unleash a sweeping combined strike that erupts outward, smashing the ground and redirecting the battle against the real threat. A violent disturbance erupts in the night as armed men are suddenly thrown into chaos. The red-haired rider reins in his horse as a blast of force surges up ahead, and he realizes something has gone wrong. He turns toward the source, trying to understand the sudden upheaval. A black-haired swordsman launches out of the explosion and dives straight at the rider from above. With a feral shout, the attacker commits fully to the ambush. The rider reacts just in time, gathering purple lightning around himself despite being caught off guard. He intercepts the descending blade with crackling magic, stopping the strike before it can kill him. Locked against the sword, he realizes his opponent is stronger than expected. The swordsman answers with confidence, making it clear he was never an easy target. The rider's irritation spikes as the fight slips out of his control. He blasts the swordsman away with lightning, forcing him back an opening distance. The swordsman lands in the middle of the clearing, only to find masked killers closing in around him. He immediately senses the trap tightening. The rider urgently warns his subordinates not to interfere. The masked men hesitate, startled by the order. Still wreathed in lightning atop his horse, the rider claims the kill for himself. The swordsman lowers his head, unreadable for a moment. The rider begins charging a larger spell, intent on ending the fight with overwhelming force. A magic circle forms above as the purple energy swells into a true spell. A silver-haired onlooker is stunned, recognizing that real magic is being used. The swordsman stands beneath the gathering power and recognizes the danger immediately. He admits the situation has become troublesome now that his enemy is casting seriously. A status-like readout reveals the rider's magic is only intermediate, and his overall ability is not exceptional, though still dangerous to someone with no resistance. The key conclusion is blunt: without magical resistance, taking that spell head-on would be fatal. Instead of retreating, the swordsman reaches for another option and decides to test it. The rider, convinced of his superiority, hurls the spell down and boasts that this will prove the gap between them. The lightning mass drops toward the swordsman like a killing blow. At the last instant, jagged ice erupts upward and collides with the spell. The swordsman reveals a calm, focused expression from behind the newly formed ice, showing he created the defense himself. The impact detonates against the ground in a huge burst. Watching from horseback, the rider is left doubting his own eyes at what just happened. The shockwave tears past as the battlefield is ripped apart by the clash. Fragments of ice and lightning scatter around the rider, proving the spell was genuinely blocked. He can only stare at the ice in disbelief, unable to explain its presence. From the smoke, the swordsman mocks him for relying on so little. He dismisses the rider as worthless, making the insult personal. The surrounding men are shaken that the target survived at all. The silver-haired observer stiffens, realizing the impossible may have happened. Even the rider struggles to accept it, insisting there must be some trick because a slave should not be able to use magic. His certainty starts to crack as the evidence keeps contradicting what he believes. The swordsman plants himself inside a glowing formation and refuses to go down, drawing power around his body. Then a new realization hits him. His mana is depleted, so by all logic he should be unable to cast anything. The contradiction leaves him reeling as he braces himself with his sword. He stares ahead in alarm, trying to understand what power he is actually using. Purple energy coils wildly around him anyway, and he recognizes with frustration that something abnormal is happening. As the force gathers over him, he begins to grasp the nature of it just as the danger peaks. The rider, now desperate and enraged, unleashes a final killing attack with his hand outstretched. A massive sphere of lightning erupts and engulfs the swordsman in a blinding explosion. Caught in the blast, he screams as the impact tears through him. With one eye glowing through the damage, he faces what seems like his death and bitterly wonders if this is where his life ends. A dying man realizes he has somehow been given a chance to redo everything, even as his body is already breaking down. A warning explains that forcing magic through an untrained body can drive a person berserk, but he rejects the danger and pushes on anyway. Blue fire erupts across half his face and body, and the strain nearly kills him as the power takes hold. He fully manifests in a monstrous, flame-wreathed state, sword in hand and barely holding himself together. Even the system trying to identify him fails, marking every trait and level as unknown, making clear that what he has become lies outside normal measure. Racked by pain, he struggles to understand the transformation consuming him. He quickly judges that this power is temporary, and decides he has to end the fight before it burns out. With that resolve, he launches himself forward through a storm of violent energy. His red-haired opponent is shaken, recognizing this as a kind of magic he has never encountered before. The transformed swordsman rises high above him, preparing a decisive overhead strike. He commits to the attack and brings his blade down with lethal force toward the rider below. The blow crashes into a conjured barrier of ice instead of flesh. The impact shatters the ice into fragments, while purple lightning lashes around the battlefield. The red-haired man endures the blast behind his own crackling power, and avoids being finished outright. As the horse surges past, the transformed fighter closes in from behind to keep the pressure on. He narrows his focus, forcing himself to stay in control despite the power tearing at him. He catches up and attacks at close range, driving the red-haired man into a desperate defense. For the first time, the red-haired man truly realizes how dangerous his opponent has become. He cries out as the blue-flame swordsman's assault breaks through his guard. Blood sprays as the rider is slashed from horseback, turning the exchange decisively against him. Thrown clear, he lands hard but immediately gathers purple lightning again, refusing to concede. The transformed swordsman pauses, breathing hard, his body visibly nearing its limit. Seeing that weakness, the red-haired man realizes his opponent cannot sustain this state much longer. The swordsman feels the same truth himself, and knows he is running out of time. Betting on endurance, the red-haired man prepares a stronger lightning technique to outlast him. Purple energy swells around him into a massive, unstable storm meant to overwhelm the exhausted swordsman. In response, the blue-flamed fighter steadies his sword and commits everything to one final attack. He cuts through the storm's edge and drives straight in, carving a path toward his enemy. As he descends for the finishing blow, he declares this strike will decide everything. He lunges directly at the red-haired man before the lightning can fully stop him. The red-haired man freezes, caught between fear and disbelief as the blade closes in. The swordsman, certain victory is finally his, presses forward with grim satisfaction. At the last instant, a golden barrier intercepts the strike and halts it cold. The sudden intervention blasts the swordsman away and saves the red-haired man from defeat. An older authority figure arrives on horseback, stops the duel, and declares that this has gone far enough. He rebukes them both, reminding them this place is for hunting, not a proper arena for settling grudges. He orders that if they insist on fighting, they can do it later after returning safely. The red-haired man immediately recognizes the newcomer as his father and falls silent. The exhausted swordsman also recognizes him as Darius, confirming the man's importance. With the battle finally over, the transformed fighter drops to one knee, relieved that he has survived long enough. Darius studies him closely, sensing that something about this young man is deeply unusual. Before anyone can press further, the swordsman collapses and asks only for rest. Several days later, he wakes in an unfamiliar room after surviving the aftermath. Still groggy, he tries to understand where he is and what became of him. The memory of his blue flame transformation flashes back, reminding him that what happened was real. He jolts upright in bed, injured but alive. Looking at his own hand, he confirms the impossible truth that he really has returned to the past. Someone beside the bed notes that he is finally awake, interrupting his thoughts. He turns sharply toward the familiar voice. To his shock, the person waiting for him is Dak, whose presence confirms just how far back he has gone. A pale young noble wakes in a daze and tries to act normal despite clearly feeling awful. He is reminded that after the previous fight, he suddenly collapsed. As he pieces it together, he recalls being carried back after Captain Karl found him unconscious. His dark-haired companion dryly notes that calling that a normal morning is a bit much. The companion gets ready to move on, signaling that the crisis has passed. Seeing the noble recovered, he suggests they go out for food and gather information in town. He quickly remembers something else and turns back to the noble. With unusual sincerity, he thanks him for what happened earlier. The noble is caught off guard that the man is actually capable of gratitude. Soon, the two head into the city, where the morning seems calm at first. That calm breaks when townspeople recognize them and react with alarm. As rough-looking men close in, the companion demands to know what their problem is. Nearby maids whisper that rumors are spreading about him and Lord Fried. When he directly asks what rumor they mean, the women panic at being noticed. Terrified, they flee as if they have seen something monstrous. The noble remarks that people are treating his companion like a ghost. The companion latches onto that comparison and starts thinking it through. He jokes that the noble looks ghost-like too, blaming his pallor on the trouble he caused. Before the banter can continue, armed men step forward and block their way. The companion complains about being dragged around by the noble, only for the crowd to identify the noble as the future lord. The confrontation turns political as the men loudly hail the noble's status. Their bold leader orders everyone else not to interfere, trying to isolate the pair. An older one-eyed subordinate immediately looks uneasy about where this is going. The bald man declares that he has come to settle the score from their last encounter. The companion answers with cold silence, unimpressed. The attacker accuses him of winning only because he had let his guard down before. He snaps his fingers as if to prove that this time he is in control. He boasts that he will not be caught off guard again. The companion remains calm while the noble stands just behind him, watching the threat build. Growing bolder, the bald man calls for the guard squad to back him up. The companion still says nothing, which only makes the scene more awkward. Even the aggressor hesitates for a moment when his intimidation fails to land. He angrily berates his own men for not attacking the instant he gives a signal. The guards admit they are reluctant because they know the companion is dangerous and because he is with the young master. The pair can only stare at the absurdity of the situation. Realizing his men are useless, the bald man decides he must act alone to save face. He sizes them up again and shifts his focus away from the companion. In his mind, the noble is the easier target. He convinces himself that while the companion is troublesome, he can handle the noble. So he lunges at the noble, accusing him of betraying Lord Fried by replacing him. The noble is stunned as the man grabs him and rants about Fried's lost position. The attacker raises a fist, intent on beating the noble down in Fried's place. Before the blow can land, the noble catches his fist cleanly. The bald man is shocked to find his attack completely stopped. The noble glares back and rejects the man's moral outrage outright. He follows by striking the attacker away with a sharp counter. As the man reels, he is almost more shaken that the noble actually answered him than by the hit itself. A new arrival steps into the scene, interrupting the standoff. An irritated officer demands to know who is causing such a commotion so early in the morning. A stern senior figure approaches with escorts, and the bald man immediately realizes someone important has arrived. An eye-patched knight officer corners two youths and smugly warns that once the royal knights target someone, escape is impossible. When a gray-haired superior arrives to investigate, the officer hurriedly tries to frame the scene as harmless discipline. He points at the two young men and claims they were the rude ones who needed to be taught proper manners. One of the accused casually interrupts, refusing to be intimidated by the officer's authority. The officer grabs him and starts to threaten him for his insolence, expecting easy submission. Instead, another knight suddenly yanks the officer away, revealing himself as an ally of the young man. The officer is stunned as his confidence collapses in an instant. A second ally joins in, and the pair openly celebrate that their friend is awake and back with them. Realizing the situation has turned completely against him, the officer can only wonder if this is really happening. The young man exposes the officer's hypocrisy by pointing out that he was only bold because he thought he was bullying a powerless servant with no backing. A purple-haired female knight backs him up and makes clear that the officer's local rules and excuses mean nothing to them. She presses the threat further, warning that if he keeps talking, he may lose his remaining eye as well. With the bully silenced, the group calmly decides to leave together. As they go, the rescued young man quietly admits he owes his savior yet another debt. The tension gives way to camaraderie, as the group seals their reunion with a round of drinks. At the tavern, the rescued youth thanks them sincerely and says he should be the one repaying the favor. The older knight brushes that aside, saying the troublesome vice-captain had been irritating him anyway, and the others agree the two youths saved them. A blonde knight asks the purple-haired woman whether she also had a grudge against that officer. She reacts explosively and refuses to discuss it, making it obvious the answer is yes. An older man cuts in to steer the conversation back to business. He reveals that he had actually been looking for the two young men because only a few royal knights remain, and he wants them to join. The offer shocks them, especially because he means recruiting them as royal knights. He sweetens it by explaining that royal knights receive treatment on par with first-class servants. The dark-haired youth immediately declines, saying he has no interest in becoming a royal knight. He adds that he is aiming for something even greater than that position. His ambition leaves the others momentarily speechless, though the mood turns charged rather than dismissive. One knight, flustered and jealous, tells him to stop chasing the Lord of the Rhine and insists he is not the only rival in the running. The purple-haired woman laughs at his outburst and corrects his excuse, reminding him the decisive move they saw was magic, not swordsmanship. Following that thought, she presses the dark-haired youth to explain how a slave could possibly have used magic. The jealous knight doubles down with a classist jab, claiming a former slave should know nothing about magic. The older knight immediately demands that he explain himself for that remark. The dark-haired youth realizes they have noticed the inconsistency he had hoped to hide. He admits to himself that it was fortunate he had already prepared for this question. His companion watches tensely, unsure what story he is about to tell. The purple-haired woman narrows the issue to a single point. How can he take back what he implied? The dark-haired youth keeps his composure and prepares to answer the suspicion directly. Before he can speak, she points at him and declares she has figured out his true identity. She boldly accuses him of being a former noble. She grabs him and insists she can tell, convinced she has seen through his disguise. Building on that theory, she claims he must be a legitimate noble child who was persecuted, sold into slavery through conspiracy, and is now serving this marquis to reclaim his lost power. In her imagination, he becomes a fallen aristocrat plotting his return from ruin. The blonde knight is baffled by how she invented such a specific backstory. The accused youth, seeing an easy escape, awkwardly laughs instead of denying it. He praises her insight just enough to encourage the misunderstanding, and she triumphantly takes it as confirmation that corrupt nobles ruined his life. He spins a dramatic tale about once being a noble from the capital who was betrayed by family intrigue and forced into slavery to survive. He escalates the act with a vow that one day he will make those nobles pay, while his friends can only stare at how far he is taking the lie. The blonde knight privately notes that the story is absurd and unlike anything their captain would ever believe. To his disbelief, the older knight accepts the tale at face value and promises to keep it secret as long as the young man does not cause trouble for the Marquis. He follows that with practical advice, warning the youth not to use magic in front of the lady or his young master friend again. The conversation ends with news that the Marquis wants to see the young man once he wakes up. A silver-haired man notices two supposed escorts moving through the city and silently fixes his attention on them. Elsewhere, several uniformed figures gather in the street, suggesting the city is already under watch and the deception is being staged in dangerous territory. The story shifts to Ale City, where the pair continue their covert movement under false identities. The blonde companion marvels that their outrageous cover story actually worked, while the dark-haired man remains focused on what comes next. He presses for the reasoning behind choosing a former noble from Ale City as the centerpiece of the lie. The answer is that Ale City is useful precisely because its reputation and politics are complicated enough to support ambiguity. Because Ale City lies far from Rhine territory, the claim is hard to verify, making noble status there an ideal distraction for investigators. The blonde man realizes the lie was designed less to convince completely than to misdirect anyone looking too closely. That thought leads him to another suspicion, and he turns the conversation toward a symbol he has been wondering about. He asks directly whether the dark-haired man knows the meaning of the three-legged crow sign. The question makes the dark-haired man glance back, and the blonde man half-jokes that this, too, had better not be another trick for misleading people. The answer triggers a memory of a night when the dark-haired man faced a horned brute, while the blonde man was held hostage beside it. In that memory, the swordsman apologizes to Dak in advance, making clear he is about to take a risk that could endanger him. Dak braces himself, understanding too late that his friend intends to strike anyway. The swordsman kills the hostage-taker in one decisive blow, choosing speed and certainty over Dak's safety. As Dak is thrown clear, he bitterly throws his friend's apology back at him, furious that a message for his sister was nearly all he would have been left with. The swordsman refuses to back down and hurls himself at the next enemy, forcing Dak to survive the aftermath rather than mourn him. His blade lands, but the enemy answers with strange blue energy instead of dying cleanly. That unnatural power crawls over the sword itself, turning the attack into a trap. The horned foe laughs, revealing he had no fear of being killed so easily. The blue aura surges back along the weapon and seizes the swordsman, lifting and immobilizing him. Caught in the backlash, he realizes too late that he has been overpowered. The monster mocks him outright, making it clear the attack never truly threatened him. Before the creature can finish him, Dak cuts in from below and forces the enemy to divide its attention. Dak declares that he is still in the fight, refusing to remain the helpless hostage his friend treated him as. The enemy is stunned that Dak can still interfere after everything that just happened. Dak uses that opening to strike hard, wounding the brute and breaking the enemy's momentum. Freed from immediate danger, the swordsman drops back, coughing and shaken by the blue energy's effect. He recovers fast enough to cut down more attackers, turning the chaos back in their favor. Dak angrily reminds him that those were almost his last words, exposing how close his reckless rescue came to becoming a final farewell. As more enemies close in, the two argue in the middle of battle, their teamwork surviving only because both are too stubborn to quit. Dak keeps fighting while scolding him, demanding to know what would have happened if the hostage had died because of that gamble. The swordsman answers while cutting through another foe, insisting the captors were never going to release Dak just because he had been injured. Their bickering turns into a rough strategy debate, with Dak demanding some kind of signal next time and the swordsman dryly asking whether Dak plans to get captured again. Around them, the surviving captives and bystanders begin to realize the pair are winning and that the threat is collapsing. Even after the immediate danger passes, the two keep trading insults, making it obvious this kind of friction is normal between them. To justify himself, the swordsman suddenly tells Dak to pay attention to his hand. He reveals the three-legged crow sign and explains he learned it from a man he met while trapped among slave traders. The sign, he says, is a call for solidarity. Anyone serving the same cause will help if they recognize it. Dak studies the gesture in silence, beginning to understand that his friend had trusted in more than blind recklessness. Even so, he circles back to the same complaint, accusing him of effectively planning to get captured again if that was his backup plan. Back in the present, the dark-haired man says the person who taught him the sign is dead now. He then reveals who that man was to him, his stubborn best friend. Dak is shaken, unable to connect that confession to anyone he remembers from the trading company or his friend's time in slavery. Before he can press further, someone knocks and the conversation is interrupted. The two are summoned into a formal audience with their lord, and the name Colin surfaces as the focus of the meeting. Their lord first asks after Dak's physical condition, showing personal concern before turning to business. The dark-haired man reports that, thanks to that lord's help, he has fully recovered. Dak offers his formal greeting as well, and the lord acknowledges him by name, making clear they have history. The lord finally reveals that he called them in for one specific reason, setting up the next major development. An older commander gathers the two young men and says he wants to address what happened at the hunting grounds. He makes clear that sneaking into the hunting grounds was reckless and forced everyone into a dangerous crisis. Rather than speak as a distant superior, he frames the matter through his long history with Glenn and the others. Looking at the portrait of his fallen companions, he admits they survived countless brushes with death together. That shared struggle makes their loss unbearable to him, because they only reached this point by enduring side by side. He confesses that if he had realized the danger sooner, the tragedy might have been prevented. One of the youths tries to shoulder the guilt for the dead, thanking him for saving those who survived and regretting that more could not be saved. The commander immediately rejects that self-blame and insists the young man did nothing wrong. He takes full responsibility himself, saying the failure was his for not foreseeing the monster's attack. Then he turns the conversation practical, noting the two have already served the family for over a year, and asking whether they would remain with him. Colin refuses the offer at once. The commander accepts the answer and asks Dak for his decision instead. To Dak's shock, the question becomes far greater than expected when the commander offers to make him a royal knight. Colin realizes this is an extraordinary chance far beyond ordinary guard duty, while Dak is overwhelmed by the weight of it. Dak struggles with the temptation, visibly torn between ambition and hesitation. At last he blurts out that he truly wants to become a royal knight. The commander receives that answer calmly and invites Colin to speak if he has anything more to add. Colin decides to use that opening to ask for something on Dak's behalf instead. He requests that Dak be allowed to return to his younger sister. The commander identifies her as Erica, a Williams household servant now working at the estate. Dak is stunned that Colin would bring this up. Colin presses the point, asking that Erica be brought in and reminding everyone that she and Dak were separated before arriving here. He reveals that Erica is in poor health and that, beneath Dak's dream of knighthood, he really wants to stay by her side. The commander tests Dak directly, asking whether that is truly what he wants most. Colin answers for him, saying Dak treats his comrades like family, and cannot ignore someone precious to him when she is suffering. Dak is left speechless by how completely Colin understands him. Moved, Colin asks that Dak be given his sister back. The commander reflects on the bond of comrades and close friends, comparing it to what he himself once had. He decides to release Dak for now, since the Williams family matter has been unresolved for some time. As Dak leaves, Colin quietly calls after him, and the room settles into a more private silence. Once they are alone, Colin approaches the commander, who stands before the window in thought. The commander brings up the day Colin challenged Slaith in the arena, returning to a suspicion he has held since then. He admits that even at that time he could not believe Colin was merely an ordinary slave. Colin's survival against a direct magic attack without injury had already defied expectation. But what truly convinced the commander was the terrifying power Colin displayed afterward. The memory of Colin wreathed in dark blue magic resurfaces as proof that his strength is anything but normal. The commander reasons that if Colin were truly a persecuted noble from Ailes City, there would have been many ways for him to reclaim his former life. Colin realizes the commander has seen through the false identity he had been using. In response, Colin invokes Marquis Darius and calls up blue crystal-like magic. As the crystals whirl around him, he denies being anyone so grand. He downplays himself as just a common man with only a little magic, even while displaying power that contradicts the claim. He pointedly contrasts himself with a Grand Master-class archmage, pretending he is too insignificant to matter. The commander is unconvinced, finding the idea that such magic belongs to an ordinary man impossible to accept. He demands Colin's true identity. Colin answers not with a name, but with praise, calling the commander one of the rare nobles who genuinely loves his people and is loved in return. Then he draws his sword, turning the exchange from suspicion into a formal declaration. He says he respects the commander for valuing merit over bloodline and feels honored to have earned notice from such a man. He declares his ideal is to become someone who can end the blood-stained supremacy that rules the world. Kneeling with his sword before the commander, Colin vows that one day he will grow into a great lord like him. He finishes with a bold promise that he will ultimately surpass him. A young swordsman kneels before a noble and vows to repay having his life saved twice by proving his worth in the upcoming selection test. He promises that once his skill is seen, the Lord can decide how best to use him. Amused and pleased by the bold pledge, the Lord accepts the offer. He dismisses the young man for now, saying he will wait to see what he can actually accomplish. As the swordsman prepares to leave, he respectfully tries to excuse himself. The Lord stops him at the last moment with one more question. He asks what the young man thinks of Roan. Caught off guard, the swordsman can only repeat the name in confusion. The Lord abruptly withdraws the question and sends him on his way anyway. The young man leaves the grand room, but the strange exchange lingers. Once alone, the Lord immediately calls for Cornell and asks what he made of that reaction. He reasons that if the boy truly is just ordinary, then something about him is still highly unusual. Cornell arrives and argues that, judging by how naturally the boy answered, he may be an extraordinary genius who somehow never realized his own fame. Even so, Cornell warns that they should stay cautious in case the boy is hiding an agenda. His concern deepens because the situation resembles something they have encountered before. Before the matter can go further, Cornell brings up another development. The Lord turns toward a portrait as he mentions receiving new information. The report has come from the spirit cat. Recognizing the timing, Cornell presents the sealed message for review. The Lord prepares to learn what this latest report has revealed. Elsewhere that night, a cat moves outside the young man's room as he works in secret. Inside, he lays out potions, materials, and the gold he earned, grateful that Marquis' storing covered his expenses so he could buy supplies. Believing the potions should sharply increase his strength, he gets ready to use them. Even while preparing, he cannot stop wondering who Roan really is. He only knows the name from his father in his previous life, with no real understanding beyond that. The Lord's question unsettles him because it felt like he should have known the answer instinctively. He sets the mystery aside and focuses on the immediate problem in front of him. Deciding that proving himself in the selection test matters first, he pours the potion into a flask. He drinks it down without hesitation. After finishing, he waits for the effect to settle. Then he activates his magic tome. The tome opens around him, filling the room with floating pages and a glowing interface. He keeps drinking as the system responds to the potion. The empty containers slip from his hand while the magical process intensifies. He braces himself for the strain. Following the tome's prompt, he channels the effect into absorption. The surge pushes his body hard enough to make the effort visibly painful. He forces the absorption through by sheer concentration. The result is disappointing. The potion only raises his mana by a single point. He realizes that even a complete mana recovery potion gives almost no growth, meaning raising his mana this way will be painfully slow. Still, because running out of mana could make him lose control again, he decides he has no choice but to keep increasing it until he finds another answer. He gulps another potion despite how terrible it tastes. The process remains miserable, leaving him nauseated and dreading how many more he may need to drink. By the time his mana reaches 20, he is already wondering if there is any easier method. At that point, the tome detects a powerful monster core and informs him it can be used as a material to create a magic tool. Intrigued, he examines the core and considers the possibility of turning it into an item. The idea excites him, and he immediately decides to try it. He activates the crafting function, and energy gathers around the core. He steadies himself and commits fully to the creation. The forging completes in a blaze of golden power, manifesting the image of a mighty horned warrior as the new magic tool is born. Following the magic tome's method, he pours mana into the monster core to forge a magic tool. He concentrates on the image he wants to create, trying to decide what form the tool should take. Once he settles on the idea, he commits to it without hesitation. The core responds and the crafting process begins in earnest. A blazing wolf-shaped force rises behind him as the creation draws on the core's power. He completes the process, bringing the new magic tool into existence. Outside, the quiet night around the estate remains undisturbed for the moment. Back in his room, the golden energy fades as the tome confirms the tool has been successfully made. He examines the result, and finds a bracelet now bound to his wrist. Its status reveals two effects: Wolf King's Blessing, which increases mana, and Wild Instinct. He immediately recognizes the mana boost as a useful blessing. Then he tests the bracelet while drinking a low-grade potion to see how it interacts with mana recovery. The readout confirms his mana has increased, making even weak potions more worthwhile. He realizes the bracelet effectively doubles his mana pool and makes replenishment far more efficient, leaving him impressed by how practical magic tools can be. What he still cannot figure out is the purpose of Wild Instinct. Before he can investigate further, a strange sensation catches his attention. His perception abruptly shifts, as if a hidden sense has awakened. Through this new vision, he perceives two maids beyond the room, their presence outlined by energy. The maids are merely complaining about being tired, which makes the sudden vision even more startling. He realizes Wild Instinct grants him a kind of X-ray perception that lets him detect people through their energy. Using that sense, he probes farther and checks another area of the estate. He identifies a group outside as members of the guard squad. He keeps scanning, testing the range and precision of the ability. Inside the mansion, he spots Marquis Darius and Katrina, both carrying blue flame-like mana, and starts comparing their signatures. In the middle of that search, a disembodied plea intrudes on his senses, begging for help and claiming hunger. He turns at once, unsettled by the unknown voice. He checks another cluster of people outside and rules them out as the source. He dismisses yet another group after finding no match there either. Then he notices an unusually dense buildup of flame-like mana coming from an upper room. That discovery makes him freeze as the situation suddenly feels dangerous. Looking through the window, he sees a woman inside holding a mass of blue flame while maids stand nearby. At that moment, something else reveals itself through his heightened perception. A terrifying red eye opens within his awareness, as if some hidden presence has noticed him back. The shock leaves him sweating and rigid. He physically recoils from the backlash of that contact. He concludes that for the woman to detect him so quickly is exactly the kind of threat he expected from her. He recalls that the woman is Lady Angelica, though he knows she is not the true problem. Her daughter Angelica Hall is introduced in his memory as an irritating noble girl, reinforcing that this household is tangled with troublesome people. Even so, he is certain the voice he heard earlier did not belong to her. He decides the search will be difficult, but he has enough of a lead to keep going. His sharpened senses finally lock onto the real source, and he realizes he has found someone else. The trail points beyond the estate to the dusky deep forest, where the plea for help still echoes. There he detects a strange concentration of mana burning in the woods. The nature of that mana alarms him, making him suspect a demon. Elsewhere, in a grand hall, a powerful white-haired noble stands with a restrained guard at sword point, asserting complete control over the scene. The kneeling guard is forced into submission before him. Other uniformed onlookers watch tensely, some with quiet satisfaction and others with unease. A red-haired noblewoman and her companion observe from the side, measuring the outcome. The wider hall falls into a heavy silence as everyone waits to see what the authority figure will do next. With the blade still at the guard's neck, the confrontation remains unresolved but firmly in the noble's hands. Katrina watches as Dak, once only a mid-rank servant, is formally elevated under Lord Darius Hall's authority. Seeing him honored makes her recall how Darius took him in years earlier and changed his fate. Back then, Dak had been publicly abused as an example to other servants, bound up and displayed in misery. His former master treated him as disposable entertainment, and even as a toy for his own son Fried. That cruelty escalated into outright humiliation as wine was deliberately poured over the boy's head. Dak endured it silently, bloodied and broken, with no power to resist. Now, in bitter contrast to that past, Darius addresses him with dignity in the hall name. He makes the change official by recognizing Dak as a knight, giving him the status he was once denied. Dak accepts the moment with quiet satisfaction, fully aware of how far he has come. His new comrades welcome him into the Royal Knights, turning the ceremony into a genuine celebration. Katrina's expression hardens, because Dak's rise confirms that Darius keeps overturning the order she believes in. As she leaves with Fried, she dismisses the Hall household as reckless for embracing commoners and former servants. Her contempt is tied to a rigid creed that treats noble blood as precious and everyone beneath it as lesser. That same cruelty once showed itself in the manner when a maid was berated over a trivial mistake. The servant was forced to the floor and humiliated simply for failing to brew tea to her mistress's standards. Katrina signaled for harsher punishment with casual indifference, as if disciplining property. The other maids rushed in fearfully, knowing one of their own was about to be made an example. The terrified girl begged forgiveness, but mercy was never truly being considered. Instead, she was ordered toward the brazier, where the punishment became horrifyingly clear. A red-hot iron was prepared while the maids looked on in dread. The servant's scream made it plain that the punishment was carried out. Katrina barely reacted, only pausing when someone called out Erica's name. From above, she noticed Darius and others approaching the scene in the courtyard below. Later, Darius asked Katrina to allow a servant named Erica from House Williams into their home. Katrina's interest sharpened at once, sensing this was not a casual request. Darius explained that bringing Erica in was a promise he had made to Colin. Outside, Dak personally escorted the injured girl away from the mansion, protecting her as they left. Katrina was disgusted that Darius would go so far for someone she considered beneath notice. Fried confronted his mother over the decision, arguing that yielding to such demands would stain their family's standing. He insisted their dignity would suffer if they kept bending to people he saw as inferiors. Katrina cut through that argument by mocking the very idea of dignity when Fried had already been humiliated by someone he called a monkey. That reminder shook him, because if he pushed the matter further, he would only expose his own weakness. Katrina snapped at him to stop wallowing and face what his defeat meant. She unleashed her power violently, demanding that Fried wake up and recover his pride. To her, his loss was intolerable precisely because he had been beaten by someone she considered beneath him. Her attack spread outward in a destructive wave that tore through the area and endangered the servants nearby. Several maids were caught in the blast and cut down, their lives treated as collateral. Even Fried was struck by the force of her outburst as she vented her fury without restraint. Standing over him, Katrina declared that this ordeal itself would serve as his selection test. The bloodied aftermath showed just how many servants had paid for her lesson. Fried still clung to the same prejudice, arguing that fighting back against such people would lower nobles to their level. Katrina reduced the matter to a simple rule: let those she calls monkeys destroy one another. Below, Darius's group gathered around Erica, hearing the contempt that had just been directed at them from above. Colin recognized the implication immediately and identified Fried as the fallen noble from Ale City. Katrina then made her position explicit, saying she would stop them for the sake of Lord Darius and House Hall, while still framing it as a Hall family selection test. Soon after, the estate filled with spectators and fireworks, turning the coming trial into a public event. Among the crowd, word spread that the boy who had humiliated Viscount Slatin and defeated Fried was here again, and many had come specifically to see him. Colin was identified by name as the focus of that attention, marking him as the challenger everyone wanted to watch. Away from the crowd, Colin tried to enter the Dustberg forest, clearly pursuing something beyond the spectacle. But he was stopped at once and told that only the lord or official lord candidates were permitted inside. A wary older noble admits he cannot guarantee the outcome this time, signaling that whatever is coming is no longer fully under his control. In the crowded hall, a young participant quietly sizes up the situation as the gathering waits for the test to begin. A hidden observer fixes on the young man with alarm, sensing something dangerous and unnatural about him. That presence resolves to investigate him, convinced this seemingly ordinary human is deeply suspicious. The crowd is abruptly called to attention as the Lord arrives to preside over the long-awaited selection. The Lord takes the stage and formally opens the family's decisive trial. He announces that the long-delayed selection test has finally begun, turning the hall's anticipation into tension. Among the candidates, the young man reflects on the family creed that strength alone earns wealth, status, and honor. The Lord declares that victory in this contest will determine who inherits the title of Hall. He makes the stakes explicit. The winner will gain the right to bear the family name and claim its authority. Before proceeding, the Lord yields to a red-haired woman who has prepared a special condition for the trial. She reveals that she has arranged a hidden mechanism within the venue that will decide the victory condition. The Lord is caught off guard when she presents a ring as the key to her plan. A brief recollection shows that bringing Erica into this matter had been a deliberate request. The Lord had agreed to involve her, but only because he expected something in return. His price was the right to hear her demand before accepting it. Erica used that leverage to claim control over the contents of the test itself. Now in front of everyone, she unveils the rule. There is only one ring. With magic, she raises the ring overhead and makes clear that only one contestant can possess it. She sends the ring into motion and begins the trial without further delay. Her spell teleports the ring and all participants to random points within the trial grounds, where weapons and supplies have already been scattered. The young man is swept away with the others before he can prepare, forced into the game on her terms. The Lord gives the final signal that the selection test is now officially underway. He and Erica watch with confidence as the contest begins under their chosen rules. The young man is engulfed in light and transported out of the hall. Erica coldly gives the command to begin. The contestants are dropped across a harsh wilderness near an active volcano, making survival part of the challenge. The young man falls through the teleportation stream and is deposited into the forested trial grounds. He lands hard but recovers quickly, immediately orienting himself in the unfamiliar terrain. Recognizing the place as the trial grounds, he realizes memories from a previous life tied to this family are resurfacing. Back in the hall, the overseers confirm that the teleportation phase has ended and all challengers are now in play. Some armored spectators look on from outside, waiting to see how the scattered contestants will fare. Others treat the event casually, as entertainment rather than a life-and-death struggle. The Lord and his companions settle in to watch, already judging the contestants from a position of comfort and power. In the forest, one participant arms himself with a sword taken from a fallen skeleton, deciding that crude steel is good enough. Another contestant grabs an old crossbow from the remains, satisfied to have a ranged weapon despite its age. The young man moves cautiously through the woods, listening for threats and trying to locate the ring before others do. He is quickly spotted as two armed contestants coordinate an ambush, one aiming from cover while the other charges in. Their first strike nearly catches him, but he slips aside just as the attack closes in. Instead of panicking, he judges their skill level and realizes they are weaker than he expected. The swordsman presses in with another heavy blow, trying to overwhelm him before he can counter. The attacker chains his swings together, but the young man stays calm and refuses to be rushed. Pinned near a tree, he decides he cannot afford to waste time trading blows with minor opponents. The swordsman's attack crashes into the trunk when the young man evades at the last instant. Thrown off balance by the miss, the attacker briefly loses control of the exchange. The young man uses the opening to reposition behind the tree, forcing both enemies to lose direct sight of him. An arrow slams into the trunk where he had been exposed, proving the crossbowman was waiting to finish him from range. The two attackers grow overconfident and taunt him, convinced they have cornered an easy target. They declare him finished and even frame his death as mercy, certain the fight is already decided. From cover, the young man turns their threat back on them and makes clear that they are the ones about to lose. A calm traveler stops two armed thieves by telling them to inspect their own hands. They discover veins and swelling spreading under their skin, and panic as something starts moving inside them. Realizing they have been infected, both men recoil in horror at the sensation crawling through their bodies. The traveler coldly explains that this is the price of trying to rob others. He identifies the creatures as heart-eater parasites. He warns that the parasites burrow into a person and consume them from within. He adds that once they finish one host, they simply move on to the next victim. Driven by desperation, the thieves decide to kill him and take whatever chance they can. Instead of fighting, he tells them it is not too late yet. To gain their attention, he reveals that he was infected before as well. He claims he survived only because he found an antidote. He produces a vial and offers a deal: let him go, or he will destroy the cure in front of them. The two men immediately turn suspicious of each other, and agree to play along until the antidote is in hand. They pretend to cooperate and urge him to hand over the medicine quickly. He acts willing to surrender it, but keeps control of the situation. Then he reveals the real trap. There is only one dose for two dying men. That single detail instantly turns their shared desperation into open distrust. One thief tries to claim the antidote by exposing the other's plan to murder him afterward. The accusation ignites old resentment, and the second man stops hiding how much he hates his partner. Their alliance collapses completely as both beg for the cure for themselves alone. Seeing that they have taken the bait, the traveler decides who to indulge first. He tosses the vial toward one of them, promising it to him. The chosen thief reaches for it, only to realize too late that he has lost track of the other man. His partner cuts him down from behind and seizes the chance for sole survival. Victorious for the moment, the surviving thief grabs the antidote and exults. Without hesitation, he drinks the entire vial. The traveler immediately attacks, making it clear he never intended to let the robber leave alive. The thief drops all pretense and admits he had planned to turn the traveler in for a reward anyway. The traveler is unsurprised and notes that a competent hunter would have brought allies before targeting him. He reveals the antidote was fake, just water he collected from the area. To prove it, he shows that the marks on his own hand were merely dirt, because he was never infected at all. The thief realizes he has been completely manipulated and flies into a rage. He charges in to kill the traveler himself, but the poison-tainted water takes effect first, and blood erupts from him mid-attack. The traveler calmly observes that the poison has finally kicked in. He explains that the whole region is saturated with parasite miasma, making even plain water lethal. As the dying man collapses, the traveler mockingly advises him to be more careful about accepting freebies in his next life. Even while bleeding out, the thief warns that House Williams will not let this killing pass. The traveler strips a ring from the corpse, treating the threat as an opportunity. He decides the ring will serve as a worthwhile reward for the encounter. Leaving the bodies behind, he remarks that this should cover his travel expenses and walks away. Elsewhere in the same blighted wilderness, serpents stir through the grass. Now cloaked, the traveler moves on in silence toward a new destination. He approaches a ruin where skeletons wander around the mouth of a dark tunnel. Above the entrance, a horned skull with glowing eyes marks the place as something unnatural. He confirms that he has found the location he was seeking. Ignoring the undead gathering around him, he heads straight into the tunnel. Inside, he walks over a floor littered with bones and shattered remains. One skull suddenly flares with eerie purple light, signaling hostile magic or reanimation. As more skulls awaken around his feet, the danger in the ruin begins to close in. A hooded young man slips through a dark stone passage, thinking he has returned to the same place as before. He suddenly halts when he senses trouble ahead. Realizing someone has reached the site before him, he becomes wary. He finds a pink-haired swordswoman surrounded by armed men who have cornered her and cut off every escape. Though outnumbered, she keeps her blade up and refuses to submit. Fear flashes across her face, but she forces herself to stay defiant. She throws herself into a desperate attack, determined to fight until the end. Her charge is met with contempt as one of the men calmly prepares to receive it. Another attacker blindsides her mid-assault and knocks her off balance. A heavy hammer follows immediately, driving her further into a losing position. The blow sends her crashing down before she can recover. Once she is on the ground, one of the men pins her underfoot and keeps her helpless. Their leader demands that she reveal where the person they seek is hiding. To break her resistance, they remind her that others who oppose them have already been slaughtered. Even beaten and bloodied, she insists she knows nothing and says she would never betray anyone to people like them. Her answer only amuses the man in charge. He presses a blade against her while proposing a crueler way to make her talk. As she screams for help, the men around her treat it as entertainment. Listening from concealment, the hooded observer recognizes them as members of House Williams. The captive woman hears that name too and reacts sharply, realizing someone nearby understands what is happening. She and the hidden man lock onto each other's presence in a tense silence. The hooded man hesitates, admitting to himself that he never wanted to get dragged into this. But when her plea for help continues, he can no longer ignore it. He steps out, drawing the gang's attention as they demand to know who he is. He tries to calm the situation by claiming he is not their enemy. The thugs dismiss him and warn him to stay out of House Williams' business. The battered woman watches in confusion and fragile hope. He acts as if he accepts their warning, masking his real intent. When one of the men notices a ring on him, suspicion replaces their earlier dismissal. They realize the ring matters, though something about him does not fit what they expected. Using their curiosity, he moves in close under the pretense of letting them inspect it. The others sense something is wrong, but too late. He positions himself right beside the hammer-wielding thug before anyone can stop him. Deciding that intervening now leaves no other choice, he quietly drives a hidden blade into the man's side. His expression hardens as he drops the act. He rips the weapon free, kicks the wounded thug away, and openly declares himself the enemy they should blame. The remaining men immediately turn murderous and rush to kill him. He meets the attack head-on with swift, precise swordplay. His first counter opens one attacker's throat before the man can react. Without pausing, he spins into the next opponent and strikes him down as well. In moments, 2 more bodies hit the floor, leaving only the leader facing him. Enraged, the leader lunges in to finish the intruder himself. Before he can act, he is caught off guard by a blade flashing across his neck from behind. The pink-haired woman, freed by the chaos, cuts him down in a single savage stroke. She follows through and leaves the leader collapsing at her feet. As the blood settles, she sees the hooded rescuer clearly and recognizes him as the one who changed everything. Still running on fury and adrenaline, she charges straight at him with her sword raised. He barely turns before her blade slices across his neck. She drives in again, wounding another thug in passing as she presses the attack toward the hooded man. The last thug falls with her sword buried in him, while the hooded man remains standing and she drops to her knees, spent and shaken. The cloaked young man acknowledges that the pink-haired girl handled herself better than he expected. Still shaken and clutching herself, she admits she truly thought she was about to die. He falls briefly silent, taking in her fear and the aftermath around them. The cold blue flames and ruined chamber leave the scene heavy with recent violence. She gently covers one of the fallen, treating the dead with care despite her injuries. Kneeling before the bodies, she offers a quiet prayer for the 3 victims. Once she finishes mourning, the young man turns the conversation toward why she was targeted. He asks what those men wanted from her in the first place. She explains that they kept demanding to know where someone named Colin was. Bruised and tearful, she says they refused to believe she knew nothing and tortured everyone else to death while sparing her. He can only grimly admit that her ordeal was brutal. Through tears, she bitterly notes that the attackers were from House Williams and asks whether his own people are really any better. He hurriedly distances himself from House Williams, insisting he never got along with them and does not care about their fate. He claims he only joined this section to get away from that house and starts to leave the matter there. Before he can go, she grabs his arm and stops him. She steps in close and declares that if that is true, then she wants to help him. Her sudden offer leaves him staring at her in confusion. He questions what someone who has nearly killed herself could possibly do for him. She steadies herself and insists that her earlier panic came from watching her friends murdered, not from being completely helpless. Their exchange is cut short when a groan echoes from nearby. One of her supposedly dead companions staggers back to his feet, and the young man immediately realizes something is wrong. The revived man is no survivor at all but a corpse moving under some other force. She jolts in alarm as the truth hits her. The dead swordsman rises fully, radiating an unnatural menace. The young man reacts instantly, drawing and striking before the thing can close in. His slash lands cleanly and nearly severs the corpse's head. Even with a blade lodged through its skull, the body keeps twitching and moving. Realizing the danger, he grabs her and orders her to run. The corpse tears the sword free from its own head and remains active. As they retreat, she warns that the man was one of her friends, and he tells her that is no longer what they are dealing with. He explains that unless the true main body inside is destroyed, the puppet corpse will keep moving. She repeats the term in confusion, trying to understand what kind of monster this is. He identifies it as a parasitic creature that latches onto humans, drains them, and turns them into walking corpses. While pulling her along, he adds that the threat is even worse than that. He reveals that these parasites share information with one another. That means once one finds prey, the rest can be guided straight to it. Almost immediately, a whole pack of glowing-eyed corpses rushes toward them. Both of them stop and turn as they realize they are being surrounded. The first puppet stands at the front of a growing horde, all of them fixed on the pair. He mutters that these creatures are maddeningly persistent. Privately, he considers retreating through a hidden passage before the situation gets worse. But the girl's reaction makes him realize she is no longer intimidated by the monsters. With a sudden grin, she says they only frightened her because she did not understand them before. Now that she knows they are just parasites wearing damaged bodies, she draws twin blades and prepares to fight. She tells her rescuer not to worry, calling him her savior with playful confidence. She argues that even if the parasites can use those bodies, the ruined corpses cannot bring out their full strength. Then, as if claiming the moment for herself, she introduces herself as Luna and asks for his name. He starts to give another name, then settles on Clark while deciding to keep his real identity hidden. Accepting that name at once, Luna promises that this time she will be the one protecting him. She brings her hands together and begins channeling power, ready to meet the horde head-on. A pink-haired swordswoman calls on divine power, preparing to purge the evil surrounding her. An unseen observer immediately recognizes her as a highly skilled swordswoman. She vows to break the dark restraints binding the dead and return their souls to rest. Her resolve hardens as she commits fully to the exorcism. A horde of glowing-eyed corpses rushes her before she can finish. She answers with a holy cross slash that tears through the undead and scatters them. Revealing a refined dual sword technique, she takes command of the battlefield. Satisfied that her strike landed cleanly, she allows herself a brief, confident smile. A black-haired swordsman watching nearby acknowledges that her skill is genuine. Even so, one corpse slips behind him and tries to strike while his attention is elsewhere. He blocks the ambush effortlessly, showing he has been in control the whole time. He dismisses the attack as a poor imitation of real swordsmanship and cuts the corpse down. Then his eye detects a separate source of mana, hinting that something more than mindless undead is present. Meanwhile, the woman keeps carving through the swarm, pressing her advantage. She continues her sweeping assault, cutting down corpse after corpse before they can surround her. Believing momentum is on her side, she decides to finish the rest in one push. That confidence breaks when a new roar interrupts her advance. She charges the apparent leader, a decorated corpse standing apart from the others. Her descending strike is stopped by a sudden red magical barrier or force. She realizes too late that this enemy is different from the others. The officer corpse reveals active magic, crackling with red energy as it counters her. She recoils in disbelief that a mere corpse can wield magic at all. The magic erupts from the ground beneath her feet, turning the floor itself into a weapon. She tries to evade, but the rising stone catches her and ruins her footing. The corpse mage keeps channeling the spell, forcing the attack through with relentless pressure. A mass of electrified rock slams into her and sends her crashing backward. She lands hard, hurt but still conscious, and struggles to recover. As she looks up, recognition begins to replace confusion. More undead approach, and among them she identifies people she once knew. The sight hits her personally as she realizes these are her own comrades. Seeing their faces as corpses overwhelms her, and the shock nearly breaks her composure. One of the undead lunges in to finish her while she is distracted. The black-haired swordsman intercepts the attack before it can reach her. He cuts the attacker down in a single decisive stroke and steps into the fight beside her. Recognizing her at last, he calls her by name, Luna. Luna turns toward him, shaken and marked by a strange corruption spreading across her face. Her mind flashes to a memory of being overwhelmed by undead while calling for Clark. He stares at her in alarm, realizing the woman before him is tied to that memory. His detection skill triggers again, confirming active mana around her condition. At the same time, the corpse mage raises another huge mass of electrified stone to crush them. He slices through the incoming spell before it can land, neutralizing the threat in one motion. The mage mocks the situation, revealing it even used a familiar body as part of its deception. Ignoring the taunt, the swordsman moves immediately to Luna's side. He cuts through the undead closing in, and reaches her before they can seize her again. Luna weakens further, the corruption spreading as her body starts to give out. Catching her, he identifies the cause. She is being controlled by a dead puppet worm. His expression hardens as he decides to deal with the real problem directly. The surrounding undead hesitate, still massed around them but no longer the true priority. Holding Luna upright, he dismisses the horde as a nuisance compared with the parasite controlling her. He unleashes a ranged strike past the lesser undead and blasts the corpse mage, targeting the source behind the entire attack. A corpse-like attacker lunges in with murderous intent, its glowing eyes fixing on its prey. The cloaked young man secures the weakened pink-haired woman in his arms as the threat closes in inside the ruin. More undead emerge behind the first, revealing that they are being surrounded by a whole pack of corpses. Instead of engaging them, he dismisses the monsters as a problem for later and keeps his focus on escape. He slips behind a stone pillar to break pursuit and by a moment. Using that opening, he commits to a rapid retreat with her still in his arms. He leaps down into a lower cavern, choosing the drop and the water below over being cornered above. The impact leaves the woman barely conscious, her body showing spreading signs of corruption. Once they are safe for the moment, he sets up a fire and starts boiling something while she lies recovering nearby. As the pot simmers, he studies its surface in thought, piecing together what is happening to her. He reaches a grim conclusion while staring into the brew, his expression turning more certain. When she wakes, her first panic is for the corpses they escaped from. He immediately stops her from moving, making it clear that her condition is the more urgent danger. At knife point, he forces her to stay still long enough for him to examine her symptoms. He notes the darkening around her brow and lips and recognizes them as signs of advancing corpse transformation. He explains that he cannot cure parasitization, only slow the corpse change, and confirms they are now in the lower level the monsters would not easily follow into. She realizes they truly have fallen to the lower level, which changes her understanding of where they are trapped. While she processes that, he finishes preparing the medicine over the fire. He offers her the herbal decoction and orders her to drink it. He tells her he boiled nearby medicinal herbs into a temporary treatment that may delay the transformation even if it cannot save her. Hearing that, she fears this only postpones an inevitable fate and that she will still end up like the undead. Even so, she drinks while voicing the terror that her future may already be decided. Faced with that possibility, she forces herself to swallow the entire bowl anyway. The medicine tastes awful, but she endures it because surviving matters more than comfort. Once finished, she abruptly decides they should move at once rather than wait around. He challenges that logic, pointing out that if this is a test to find the king, rushing blindly makes no sense. She reveals her real motive. If she is already partly parasitized, she wants to use whatever time remains to be useful. Trying to stay upbeat, she proposes distracting the corpses so he can use the chance to escape. He flatly refuses by declaring that he is staying. His answer catches her completely off guard. He reasons that if the lower level connects to flowing water, they may still have a route out, making her sacrifice unnecessary. Before discussing escape further, he asks whether she can control the thing inside her body. She hesitates, unsettled by the question because she has no clear answer. At last she admits she does not know whether she can control it at all. That uncertainty sends her back to memories of the friends she grew up with, and the life they shared before everything went wrong. She remembers how hopeless things once felt until meeting the Lord changed the course of her life. Now she reflects that she had believed this trial was their chance at grace and salvation. Instead, she sees herself ending up like the monsters and is crushed by the thought. As she breaks down, he tells her that wanting to set her friends free does not require her to die before reaching them. He brushes aside her tears as something to deal with later and pushes her to think practically. He insists they are not out of options yet. That claim jolts her out of despair and makes her listen. He explains that the key is the parasite's queen mother, and that the dungeon's purpose may be to force a symbiosis with her. Because the queen is already inside her, he says she may be able to use the dungeon's dangerous power instead of being consumed by it. She immediately resolves to fight for that chance, driven by her promise to protect him. Then she awkwardly admits she is already partly transformed, so some precautions are still reasonable. He agrees and says that if she is coming with him, the rest of his measures are simply precautions. To prove the point, he dumps the entire pot of medicine into the fire rather than saving any more of it. She is horrified that he throws away all of the hard-won treatment at once. He reminds her that the earlier dose already pushed her body to its limit, so taking more now would be pointless and dangerous. As they press deeper into the cave, the pink-haired woman reluctantly agrees to keep going, even if it means drinking later. The tunnel ahead is choked with webs, making it clear they have entered the death puppet worm's territory. She snaps out of her distraction when spider-like creatures skitter nearby, reminding her how dangerous the nest is. While following the man through the maze-like cavern, she worries they may be heading straight into the enemy's center. She warns that this area should contain monsters around level 3, but he reveals he does not even know what that ranking means. As he casually tears through the webbing, she realizes she has to explain the basic monster classification system to him. She says monsters are ranked by strength, with level 1 creatures being mostly harmless. She adds that level 2 and 3 monsters usually require trained combat techniques to kill. Judging from their earlier fight, he concludes the ordinary death puppet worms they faced were about level 2. She estimates their queen is around level 3, but remains troubled that a level 2 monster seemed able to use magic. He dismisses her concern by suggesting the worm may simply have had a specialized ability rather than true magic, which she finds absurd. She insists that only God's chosen nobles and envoys are supposed to wield divine power, so a monster doing the same should be impossible. He presses the distinction, asking whether the flames and acid those monsters used might count as innate abilities instead. She rejects that too, explaining that real magic always leaves a divine sigil behind. Remembering the corpse they examined, she points out that it did leave such a sigil, proving magic was involved. She argues that this makes no sense because such powers belong to far stronger monsters, not ordinary death puppet worms. He pretends to accept her explanation, though his reaction suggests he is still unconvinced. Privately, he recalls that he defeated those creatures easily before, which makes the official ranking sound even less reliable. He concludes the classification itself may be wrong and suggests the church has been feeding people false information. From there, he wonders if the real mistake lies in the entire accepted system of power. His suspicion that the church may be wrong infuriates her, and she finally explodes at what she sees as blasphemous mockery. She defends God and the established order with open anger, refusing to let him insult either. He notices her fury but stays calm, letting her outrage pass without taking it seriously. Instead of escalating, he casually apologizes and shifts the conversation back to the mission. As he studies the cave wall, he keeps following his own line of reasoning rather than dropping the issue. He asks the question she dreads most: if monsters can use magic, does that mean they too are God's envoys? He pushes further, suggesting that perhaps magic itself is not exclusive to divine servants at all. That possibility shakes her faith so badly that she can barely deny it. Overwhelmed, she drops to the ground as the doctrine she trusted collides with what she has witnessed. She remembers that the mark of an envoy is supposed to be a sacred gift reserved for the devout, making the implication unbearable. Seeing her spiral, he abruptly snaps her out of it with a sharp flick to the forehead. He tells her to save the crisis of faith for later because killing the death puppet queen comes first. She follows as he resumes the advance, still unsettled but forced back into the immediate task. When she asks where they are going, he gives only a brief answer and keeps moving. He leads her to a hidden stockpile of barrels and crates, revealing he intends to use the supplies to bring down the queen. The smell makes her recoil as she realizes the barrels contain alcohol. Noticing charcoal among the supplies, she begins to understand the outline of his plan. She is alarmed that he might be planning to fight the queen with fire. He immediately rejects her assumption, making clear that simple burning is not his strategy. She insists that even regular worms at this level would not be stopped that way, much less the queen. He treats her objection as premature and remains confident. With a strange metal tool in hand, he says it is too early for her to declare failure. Soon they arrive at a massive sealed door deeper in the cavern. He identifies it as the entrance to the queen's chamber. She immediately asks how they are supposed to get through such a barrier. He answers with blunt simplicity and draws his dagger, intending to break it by force. He unleashes a powerful strike against the door, sending a violent shock through it. She is stunned that the barrier withstands an attack she believes should have shattered it. He follows up without hesitation, and the door finally begins to crack apart under his repeated blows. Watching him force open the queen's chamber with nothing but a dagger, she can only stare in disbelief. In the dim underground passage, the pair press deeper into a place lit by eerie blue flames. They advance through a corridor choked with webs and strange swollen growths, staying alert as the ruin grows more ominous. A sudden disturbance ahead makes them slow, sensing they have found something important. At the edge of a waterlogged chamber, they discover a corpse floating below the walkway. The body is scarred and long dead, but its condition suggests it did not die peacefully. The pink-haired woman is unsettled at once, realizing this place is far more dangerous than it first seemed. She calls Clark's attention to the body, trying to confirm what they are dealing with. Before she can finish, a new presence interrupts her. A figure wrapped in purple energy appears in the darkness ahead, drawing both of them into a standoff. The corpse reveals itself as the Death Puppet Queen, now inhabiting an armored swordsman's body and eyeing them like prey. Its first words make its intent clear. It sees the intruders as fresh meat. When the woman recoils that the corpse spoke, Clark immediately explains that the Death Puppet Queen can speak through whatever body it possesses. The monster savors the thought of devouring them and prepares its blade with crackling power. From the body it chose, they infer that this host was no ordinary dead man. The possessed swordsman raises his weapon to strike, purple force surging around him. Clark warns her to move, and they barely evade a devastating slash that tears through the chamber. As the attack crashes past them, the woman admits Clark's earlier judgment was right. Clark identifies the host as House Hall's prodigy, confirming they are facing someone famous even in death. He recognizes the body as Phoenix Hall, one of the Empire's leading heirs and a former student of the Sword Saint. The Death Puppet Queen, now wearing Phoenix Hall's body, decides it is time to fully make use of this vessel. Clark recalls that the trial grounds are a secret domain created by House Hall to test and choose its next heir. Over generations, the place was filled with monsters and treasures gathered from across the Empire. Even after so many deaths, the remains of those who fell there still wander the land. Those dead do not rest. They linger as corrupted, green-lit husks. Among all of them, Phoenix Hall stood apart as a legendary warrior despite being born unable to use magic. That weakness invited ridicule, but no one ever doubted the terrifying level of his swordsmanship. Now that same unmatched skill is being wielded by the Death Puppet Queen. The woman realizes in alarm that they are facing the Golden Sword King himself. Clark coolly reasons that even a top-ranked noble heir is still vulnerable if his mind can be manipulated. He concludes the enemy must have worn Phoenix Hall down with lesser hosts until his guard finally broke. The truth is revealed on the corpse's neck. The Death Puppet Queen is a parasitic creature that invades and controls human bodies. Accepting that this host cannot be saved, they resolve to kill it before it can do more harm. Even so, the woman's tense stare shows she understands how overwhelming this opponent may be. The possessed swordsman mocks their fear, enjoying the pressure he is putting on them. He summons a storm of spectral blades and demands submission. As the blades gather overhead, Clark orders the woman to prepare for a lethal barrage. The Death Puppet Queen unleashes the attack with gleeful cruelty. They split apart and dodge through the rain of blades, trying to survive the opening assault. Clark uses the chaos to launch himself forward, choosing offense over retreat. He draws his sword technique, aiming to strike before the monster can fully react. He closes the distance in a sudden aerial rush and attacks from above. The Death Puppet Queen reads the move instantly and dismisses it as a trick meant to distract from the real body. It catches Clark's blade barehanded, exposing his feint and seizing control of the exchange. With contempt, it crushes the sword in its grip. Clark is forced back as the monster declares such deception useless against it. Then, with mocking piety, it turns its attention to the woman instead. It rushes her before she can fully reposition, bringing Phoenix Hall's swordsmanship to bear. She tries to block, but the possessed prodigy overwhelms her instantly and calls her attack far too slow. In that instant, she realizes she has been completely outmatched. The Death Puppet Queen follows through with a crushing blow that sends her flying as Clark cries out in alarm. The cloaked swordsman rushes the armored enemy head-on, forcing the fight into close quarters. He narrows his focus and prepares a precise counter with his blade. His sweeping slash drives a burst of force toward the opponent and briefly seizes the initiative. The armored figure meets the attack directly, bringing his own weapon down with overwhelming strength. Their blades lock, and the clash reveals that brute force alone will not decide this exchange. At close range, the enemy studies him and realizes his body and reactions make him an ideal host. Convinced he has found the perfect vessel, the armored being knocks the swordsman back and declares his intent to take him over. Instead of panicking, the swordsman reaches for something hidden in his cloak. He springs upward above the enemy, setting up an unexpected attack from overhead. The armored foe raises his sword to intercept, assuming he understands the man's tactics. That confidence breaks when a strange liquid splashes across his armor and face. He finally recognizes the substance as alcohol, and is caught off guard by the absurdity of it. A sudden blast ignites around him, turning the liquid into a violent burst of fire. As the enemy erupts in flames, the swordsman mocks him for not seeing such a simple trick coming. He explains that truth can hide inside something dismissed as foolish, and that a weapon's worth is not decided by whether it is a sword. The enemy's blade remains in hand, but the fire now clings to his damaged body. The swordsman presses the point that with a body already rotting, the burning will wear him down fast. Cracking under the heat, the armored figure is shaken by what is happening to him. That sight triggers a memory in the swordsman, revealing where this tactic came from. He recalls an earlier time at the resistance camp in his previous life. Back then, he and another recruit examined a suspicious liquor and wondered if it was some kind of secret weapon. A veteran named Ellen explained that they mixed a material called sparkstone into alcohol. She told them the mixture ignites from even a slight impact once the stone is ground finely enough. To prove it, she set off a sample and showed how devastating the resulting fire could be. Ellen admitted the weapon was born from desperation after demons repeatedly abandoned their human collaborators once things turned bad. Even so, she believed the mixture would work on sturdy demons as well. Her confidence made clear that this was hard-earned knowledge, not guesswork. She proudly presented the bottle as a laborer's answer to enemies stronger than themselves. When asked what to call it, the group looked for a name worthy of its effect. The swordsman remembered taking up 2 of the small bottles for practical use. He had even given the improvised weapon a dramatic name before throwing it. The memory ends with the same kind of fiery detonation now consuming his enemy in the present. Amazingly, the armored figure endures the blasts and marvels at the destructive force instead of collapsing. Still burning, he turns away from the swordsman and dismisses him as no longer worth immediate attention. A pink-haired ally arrives with more bottles, and the enemy rejects being compared to weak larvae. The swordsman quickly briefs her that a death puppet queen hides in its nest to protect its brood. He hands her an incendiary bottle and tells her to use it on the larvae while he draws the queen's attention. She follows through at once, and another explosion tears through the nest. The blast scatters and burns the larvae across the ground. Seeing the brood destroyed, she steels herself and insists they must bring the monster down for everyone's sake. The armored enemy steps forward through the flames, his fury now focused on them. He rages that they dared harm what he calls his children, revealing a twisted attachment to the brood. The swordsman senses mana and realizes the situation has changed in a far more dangerous way. Energy gathers into the enemy's sword as he grips it with renewed purpose. He vows to burn them so completely that nothing, not even their bones, will remain. The pink-haired woman is stunned that he can use magic at all. The swordsman identifies the power as Golden Blade, recognizing the technique before it is unleashed. The armored figure roars as the spell surges through his body and weapon. A massive ring of fire erupts outward from him, turning the battlefield into an inferno. As the flames tower higher, he begins preparing another attack, making it clear the fight is only escalating. A winged armored enemy dives straight at the cloaked young man, opening the clash with overwhelming aggression. The attacker cuts into him mid-charge and mocks how easily human flesh gives way, drawing blood at once. Even while hurt, the young man realizes the enemy's mana is abnormal and far beyond what it should be. As the armored foe bears down again, the sheer power on display makes it clear this is no ordinary beginner-level magic. Recognizing they cannot drag this out, he urgently calls Luna in to end the fight immediately. Luna answers from above and strikes the enemy's exposed opening before it can press its advantage. She drives through a storm of shattered debris, committing fully to the counterattack. Seeing the guard broken, Luna judges the target should now be easy to finish. Instead, she is stunned to find the armored body splitting apart in a way she did not expect. The broken pieces fall away in purple corruption, while both humans pull back, realizing the enemy is not dying normally. The scattered armor begins moving again through the flames, refusing to stay destroyed. The creature taunts them, making it clear they have mistaken a temporary setback for victory. Luna is shaken by the realization that the enemy can literally divide itself and keep functioning. The young man admits he has never seen a technique like this, deepening the mystery around their opponent. Before they can regroup, multiple armored bodies converge on Luna at once, turning one foe into a swarm. The young man cuts in to protect her, warning that worrying about her now will only get them both killed. He meets the assault with ice magic, instantly freezing water into solid forms to block the incoming blades. The ice spreads over one of the armored bodies, locking it into a brittle frozen shell. He shatters the frozen construct apart, trying to erase the threat completely instead of merely damaging it. But his confidence falters when he senses the attack still has not truly ended the danger. The real body reveals itself amid the chaos, declaring that the Golden Sword King cannot be destroyed so easily. Surrounded again by armed copies, the young man is mocked as the enemy prepares another killing technique. A blood-red sword art erupts from all sides, turning the space around him into a lethal cage of slashing force. Yet, in the middle of the attack, the enemy's composure slips for an instant as something unexpected catches its attention. The young man appears at a distance behind an ice decoy, having escaped the trap by substitution. The enemy realizes too late that it struck only frozen bait, while its prey slipped away. Annoyed and tightening its grip on the sword, it searches for the humans and wonders if they fled. Instead of pursuing carefully, the creature unleashes a massive flaming slash to flush them out. The attack tears upward in a towering arc, blasting apart the area in a reckless display of power. Hidden away from the blast, the two humans stagger to a stop, clearly exhausted from barely escaping. The young man catches Luna as she nearly collapses, supporting her while both struggle to breathe. He pieces together the impossible truth: the enemy can regenerate, split itself, and amplify mana far beyond what should be possible. Unable to reconcile those abilities with anything he knows, he is left wondering what they are really fighting. Luna coughs up blood in his arms, showing the battle has pushed her close to her limit. He lowers her carefully and checks on her, trying to keep her conscious and steady. Luna apologizes for failing to do more, frustrated that even her effort was not enough. He rejects her self-blame, and admits his own mistake was assuming divine punishment alone would finish the monster. Even so, he notices she still has a little strength left, meaning they have not run out of options yet. He tells her to stay back and rest while he goes to bring the creature down himself. Luna refuses to be left behind and insists on continuing despite her condition. Before they can decide, a violent tremor interrupts them and signals the enemy has found their position. The young man snaps to attention, instantly recognizing the danger closing in. The armored foe descends on them again, mocking their attempt to hide and calling their effort pathetic. Laughing at their desperation, it revels in how thoroughly it believes it has cornered them. The young man stands his ground and answers with contempt, dismissing the monster as a mere parasite. Then he notices a new presence, realizing the situation may be turning in an unexpected way. A pack of green-eyed undead emerges nearby, and he dryly notes that the enemy has brought more nuisances into the fight. The armored creature ignores the complication and vows that this time it will make sure he dies. As the monster charges and the undead close in from above, the young man shields Luna and prepares for a two-front assault. He gathers jagged ice around his hands, readying another spell as the next exchange begins. The armored enemy crashes down through a wall of ice the black-haired fighter raises, forcing his way into close combat. He smashes through the frozen barrier with brute force, refusing to let the defense slow his advance. Watching the blurred movement in the mist, the young man realizes his opponent is reading the pattern of his evasive steps. Even as he tries to direct Luna to move ahead, he senses something is wrong with her behind him. Luna suddenly locks onto him from behind, her body no longer under her own control as she nearly strangles him. His alarm turns from the enemy to Luna when he understands she is the one attacking him. Through tears, Luna apologizes and admits she can no longer move by her own will. He identifies the cause at once. The enemy has infected her with death puppet worms and turned her into a hostage. The armored foe revels in it, mocking the medicine that only prolongs Luna's suffering instead of saving her. Using Luna's life as leverage, he orders the young man to submit. When the command is refused, the enemy charges straight in to crush him. The young man is knocked down, and Luna stands over him like an executioner, while the enemy presses his advantage. As he looks up at her face, he realizes this expression belongs to the body's original owner rather than the Luna he knows. Before the armored attacker can finish things, dark spikes erupt through his body from within. Purple webbing and internal blades tear through his armor, as if something hidden inside him has turned traitor. The chamber fills with binding webs, and the fallen young man understands that the enemy's own blood has been seized as well. The armored body is violently flipped and impaled, completely overpowered by the force now bursting out of it. A voice coldly confirms that even his blood now belongs to another will. A monstrous purple woman emerges from the wreck of the armor, revealing herself as the true power that had been using that shell. Elsewhere above the arena, observers watch through portals and note that it has been years since the selection test was last held. One of them worries about Colin, but another points out that with their barrier they cannot see or contact what is happening inside. A relaxed woman drinks and dismisses the concern, certain the boy can handle himself. She insists there is no reason to worry about him, projecting total confidence. The blonde observer is not fully convinced, repeating the reassurance with doubt. As the portals hang over the silent arena, he can only hope that confidence is justified. Back inside, the bandaged young man stirs, regaining awareness in the middle of the demon's web-filled domain. The demon welcomes his return, pleased that he has awakened in time to witness what she intends. She bares her fangs and prepares to turn him into prey rather than a person. Her intent is to reduce him to flesh and blood for consumption. She declares that his body will be absorbed into her brood's growth, treating him as breeding stock and food at once. But suspended in her webs, he cuts in to tell her that her precious brood ends here. In the same instant, hidden blades of wind or sword force rip through her torso and spray green blood. The attack tears her open from below, and she recoils as he breaks free into motion. Shocked, she cannot understand how he resisted when he should still have been under her control. Luna answers for him, revealing that her earlier helplessness had been a performance. She explains that the deception was meant to lure the parasite out of the Golden Sword King's body, where it had been hiding. Realizing too late, the demon is caught off guard as Luna launches her sword technique. A storm of slashes crashes into the demon, shredding her with a thunderous barrage. Freed from the bindings, the young man grins through the unraveling web and joins the counterattack. He dives down through the swirling strands and drives the assault harder as the demon collapses under repeated wounds. Falling apart, she bitterly recognizes that she has been tricked once again. Even then she clings to the identity of the immortal Golden Sword King Daizo, refusing to admit what she truly is. The young man seizes her by the head and tells her that if she were truly that legendary king, they would never have stood a chance. With blade in hand, he rejects the lie outright and calls her human imitation pathetic. He orders her to stop pretending to be human at all. Then he drives his sword down and names her for what she is, a parasite. The demon screams as the blade pins through her skull and green blood erupts. Her death cry triggers the brood around them, and the surrounding creatures begin to convulse and fail. The nest collapses into rupturing bodies and scattered bones as the parasite's control is destroyed. Amid the spray of green blood, Luna closes her eyes in grim relief as the nightmare finally ends. A pink-haired swordswoman emerges covered in foul green slime and openly disgusted by the mess. As she steadies herself, she notices someone nearby and her attention sharpens. A black-haired man recoils at the sight of her, startled to find her armed and splattered with monster remains. She teasingly reminds him she was close behind, while he awkwardly tries to recover. Brushing past the awkwardness, she urges Mr. Clark to keep moving instead of lingering there. He leads her deeper into the building, choosing to press on rather than turn back. When they reach what looks like a dead end, he reveals he was actually searching for a hidden room. She points out that the worm inside her vanished after the Death Puppet Queen died, so she cannot see why they still need to continue. He answers that the point is to pass the selection test, then activates a mechanism in the wall. She is left confused by what he is doing. A concealed doorway slides open, confirming he knew exactly where to search. A brilliant chamber is revealed beyond, and she immediately assumes the ring must be inside. He corrects her and explains that what lies there is not the ring itself, but the key to obtaining it. That distinction catches her completely off guard. They step into a vast treasure room overflowing with wealth beyond anything she expected. The chamber is packed with chests, coins, jewels, and relics, making it clear this place hides more than simple loot. She is dazzled enough to blurt out that they have found a treasure trove. He explains that the trial grounds are where participants choose how to proceed, but also where families hide valuables, secrets, and records. He admits that in his previous life he found this room by pure luck, and even then he was half dead and failed the test anyway. Among the treasure, he discovers an old map and realizes it charts the Dusk Deep. Studying the markings, he notices unusual symbols that suggest hidden meaning rather than ordinary geography. That discovery immediately focuses him. He identifies a huge area marked as Forbidden Forest and senses that something important is concealed there. He decides he must clear the test first and investigate that mystery afterward. His attention is broken when he notices a plain cloth pouch sitting incongruously among the riches. Because it looks too ordinary for such a room, he suspects it may be valuable in a different way. He picks up the pouch to inspect it more closely. A magical interface flares to life from inside, confirming the item is enchanted. The pouch identifies itself as a pocket dimension storage tool, and he instantly recognizes its usefulness. He realizes it is effectively an endless pouch capable of storing items. That gives him an immediate idea. Before he can act on it, the pink-haired woman calls out to remind him of the real objective. She points out that despite all this searching, there is still no ring anywhere in sight. He counters by noting she could not possibly have searched the entire room already. She protests that she only assumed the ring was there because he said so. Instead of answering directly, he tells her to gather a few gems that shine strongly even in the dark and promises it will make sense soon. She is baffled that gemstones are suddenly part of his plan. Even so, she obediently collects a colorful armful of gems while still trying to understand how this helps them pass. When he notices her hesitation, she quickly hides her uncertainty and insists nothing is wrong. Still carrying the gems, she asks what they are supposed to do next. He resumes walking and says the obvious next step is to find the ring. When she asks if he knows where it is, he admits he has no idea. But he adds with confidence that he knows someone who probably does. He explains that this person is a professional when it comes to that sort of search. The scene shifts as a tree is violently cut apart, showing him testing sword techniques elsewhere. He drives through the strike with spectral figures echoing behind him, trying to reproduce a powerful style. After another attempt, he concludes this sword is still not the one he is trying to imitate. Frustrated, he admits he cannot recreate the golden sword no matter how hard he thinks about it. He recalls Phoenix, the heroic noble who once wielded a legendary flaming blade and chose the path of the sword. Remembering that the magic tome contains related spells, he turns to it as the next possible clue. He explains that every last trace of his magic can be turned into sword energy, making his current technique only a crude stand-in for the true Phoenix afterimage. As a spectral double trails behind him, he clarifies that the clone may resemble that famed technique, but its performance falls far short of the original. While moving through the forest, he reflects on how extraordinary the original swordsman must have been to pull off something on that level. He shifts focus to another advantage and opens his inventory, revealing a storage item called the Infinite Sack with a blood mark activation condition. Seeing that requirement, he immediately realizes the mark must mean fresh blood. He dryly notes that no one needs to explain his own blood to him and prepares to use the item. Just before proceeding, a sudden thought stops him. He remembers he still needs blood, and the thought connects in his mind with the image of a golden armored foe. He channels magic through his sword and summons a glowing circle beneath himself, readying for action. Power gathers around the blade as he steadies it and sharpens his focus. The sword's edge hums with concentrated energy, signaling the technique is nearly complete. Then he senses something unexpected nearby and breaks from his concentration. He turns toward the disturbance as someone approaches from behind. A pink-haired woman arrives with a torch, cheerfully calling out to him by name. Recognizing her, he asks how the little girl Ekrind is doing. She reports that she left the girl exactly where he told her to, implying that part of his plan was carried out. When she notices what he was doing, she guesses he was in the middle of sword training. Her casual assumption leaves him awkwardly trying to pass the scene off as something obvious and harmless. The two stand among the dead trees, the moment briefly settling into uneasy calm. She looks around and questions whether his supposed profession really belongs here, since the place hardly seems fit for ordinary people. Before the conversation can continue, she suddenly reacts to a new sound or presence in the area. She moves close to him and asks what just made that noise. He calmly takes hold of her torch and remarks that the source has arrived. In the next instant he yanks her out of the way as a violent icy strike crashes down where they were standing, confirming their enemy is here.